What happens when a birthday joke becomes the most dangerous question you've ever asked? When Elena Ward, CEO of Crestwell Dynamics, playfully asked her project manager, "Will you marry me?" She expected laughter. What she got instead was a quiet, "What if I say yes?" that would unravel everything: her career, his reputation, and a conspiracy that nearly destroyed them both. This is the story of two people who found love in the wreckage of betrayal, a single father who refused to break, and a woman who risked everything for the truth. Stay until the end and comment your city so I can see how far this story reaches across the world. The fluorescent lights of Crestwell Dynamics hummed their usual monotonous tune on that particular Thursday afternoon in March, casting sterile white light across the executive conference room where Elena Ward stood at the head of the mahogany table. She was 34, sharp as broken glass, and carried herself with the kind of confidence that made grown men straighten their ties when she entered a room. Her navy Armani blazer was tailored to perfection, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that somehow made her green eyes even more striking. She'd built this tech consulting empire from a failing startup into a $200 million enterprise in just 7 years, and everyone in that room knew it. Today was different, though. Today was her birthday, and her executive assistant, Marcus, had insisted on bringing in cupcakes despite her explicit instructions to keep things professional. The 20-person management team sat around the table, pretending to focus on quarterly projections while sneaking glances at the ridiculous pink frosted confections that seemed almost offensive in their cheerfulness. All right, Elena conceded, setting down her laser pointer with exaggerated reluctance. 5 minutes for this nonsense, then we're back to the Riverside merger. The team erupted in applause and laughter. Someone, probably Jennifer from marketing, had brought champagne, actual champagne, in the middle of a Thursday work meeting. Elena felt her professional facade cracking into something resembling amusement. As the impromptu celebration unfolded around her, Elena's gaze drifted, as it often did these days, to the far end of the table where Mason Reed sat. He was 37, though you'd never guess it from the perpetual weariness in his gray eyes. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of quiet presence that made people forget he was in the room until he spoke. His white button-down was wrinkled at the elbows, his tie slightly loosened, the universal uniform of someone who'd been at work since 6 a.m. and would probably stay until 7. Mason was her mystery. In a company full of aggressive climbers and networking vultures, he was an anomaly. He delivered exceptional work, never asked for raises, never politicked, never schmoozed. He came in early, left exactly at 5:30, and somehow managed to carry a project load that should have required 3 people. Elena had promoted him to senior project manager 8 months ago, and he'd accepted with the same quiet nod he gave everything else, as if extraordinary achievement was just another Thursday. "Speech, speech," someone chanted, and suddenly all eyes were on Elena. She raised her champagne flute, feeling ridiculous and oddly touched at the same time. "You all know I hate this kind of thing," she began, and the room laughed. "But I appreciate it, truly. This company exists because each of you brings something irreplaceable to the table. We've built something remarkable together, and I'm proud to lead this team." Applause. Someone whistled. Jennifer was definitely crying. Then, in a moment that would later feel like destiny or insanity depending on the day, Elena's champagne-loosened tongue took an unexpected turn. Her eyes landed on Mason, who was politely clapping, his expression pleasantly neutral as always. "You know what?" Elena said, her voice taking on that playful edge that her executive team had learned to both fear and love. "They say you're supposed to do something crazy on your birthday. Something unexpected." The room leaned in. Elena walked around the table, her heels clicking against the polished floor, until she stood directly in front of Mason Reed. The conversation died away. Everyone was watching now. "Mason," Elena said, her eyes glittering with mischief and maybe a third glass of champagne. "You're stable, reliable, never complain, always deliver. You're basically the perfect partner." Nervous laughter rippled through the room. Mason's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Caution, maybe, or curiosity. Elena extended her hand dramatically. "So, here's my birthday wish. Mason Reed, will you marry me?" The conference room exploded with laughter. Someone actually snorted champagne through their nose. Jennifer was clutching her chest like she might have a heart attack from the hilarity. Even Derek Shaw, the perpetually bitter senior analyst who sat 2 seats down, cracked a smile. But Mason didn't laugh. He looked at Elena with those steady gray eyes, and for 3 impossibly long seconds, the laughter began to fade as people realized he wasn't joining in. Then, in a voice that was perfectly calm, perfectly serious, Mason spoke. "What if I say yes?" The room went silent. Not the comfortable silence of people catching their breath after a good joke, but the sharp, crystalline silence of everyone suddenly realizing they might have missed something important. Elena felt her smile freeze on her face. She'd expected a laugh, a witty deflection, maybe even a blush. Instead, Mason was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not challenging, not flirtatious, just considering. Like she'd asked him about lunch preferences instead of proposing marriage in front of their entire management team. Elena started, then stopped. She'd built a career on never being flustered, on always having the perfect response. But right now, standing in front of Mason Reed with 20 pairs of eyes burning into her back, she had absolutely nothing. Marcus saved her. "Oh my God, Mason, you actually broke the boss. Quick, someone screenshot this for the company newsletter." The tension shattered. Everyone laughed again, louder this time, the kind of laughter that comes from relief more than humor. Someone made a joke about HR violations. Jennifer suggested they register at Williams-Sonoma. The moment dissolved into chaos and celebration, and Elena retreated to her end of the table with as much dignity as she could muster. But she couldn't stop glancing at Mason, who had returned to his usual quiet demeanor, sipping his champagne with the same measured calm he brought to everything. As if he hadn't just turned her entire world slightly sideways with 4 simple words. The meeting ended 20 minutes later, and people filed out with the sugar-drunk enthusiasm of adults who'd been allowed to party during work hours. Elena gathered her materials, hyper-aware that Mason was still in the room, methodically stacking papers and closing his laptop. "That was quite a moment," he said quietly, not looking up. Elena felt heat creep up her neck. "I apologize if I made you uncomfortable. It was meant to be funny." "It was funny," Mason replied, finally meeting her eyes. "The question is, did you mean it to be only funny?" Elena's breath caught. This was dangerous territory. Mason was an employee. She was his boss. There were rules, policies, professional boundaries that she'd never even considered crossing in 7 years of running this company. "Of course I did," she said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. Mason nodded slowly, then did something unexpected. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face, erasing years of weariness and revealing someone younger, lighter, almost playful underneath. "Shame," he said simply. "For a second there, I thought I might get lucky." Then he picked up his laptop bag and walked out, leaving Elena standing alone in the conference room, heart pounding, mind racing, and utterly unsure of what had just happened. Over the next 2 weeks, Elena tried to forget the incident. She buried herself in work, which wasn't difficult. The Riverside merger was entering its critical phase, and the Haverford project was running into technical complications that required her direct attention. She spent 14-hour days in back-to-back meetings, conference calls, and strategy sessions. But she couldn't stop noticing Mason. It started small. She'd catch herself looking for him in morning meetings, tracking his arrival time without meaning to. 6:15, every day, without fail. She began to wonder what drove someone to that kind of consistency. Ambition? No. Ambitious people made sure others saw their dedication. Mason slipped in quietly, got his coffee, and disappeared into his office before most of the building was awake. One morning, Elena arrived at 6:30. Unusual for her, but she'd been too restless to sleep, and found Mason already at his desk, visible through his glass office door. He was on a video call, but not the kind she expected. On his screen was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with wild blonde curls and Mason's same gray eyes. Elena couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see Mason's face transform. The weariness vanished. His whole being softened into something tender and present. He was making silly faces, and the little girl was giggling, holding up drawings she'd made. When the call ended, Mason sat for a moment with his hand pressed against the screen, and Elena saw something in his expression that made her chest tight. Love so fierce it was almost painful to witness. She turned away before he could see her watching, but the image stayed with her all day. That afternoon, Marcus dropped a personnel file on her desk. "The insurance renewal forms," he said. "I need your signature on the family coverage updates." Elena flipped through absently, then stopped at Mason Reed's form. Emergency contact. Ellie Reed, daughter, age 8. Second emergency contact. The line was blank. No spouse, no partner, no family besides his daughter. "Marcus," Elena said carefully, "Mason Reed's file shows him as single parent. Has it always been this way?" Marcus nodded. "His wife died 3 years ago. Car accident. He took a month off, came back, and never mentioned it again. He leaves every day at 5:30 sharp for pickup at his daughter's school. Never misses it. Never asks for exceptions." Something clicked into place for Elena. The early mornings weren't about ambition. They were necessity. Mason front-loaded his work hours so he could be present for his daughter in the afternoons and evenings. The excellence wasn't about climbing the ladder. It was about keeping his job secure enough to provide stability for a little girl who'd already lost too much. "Why didn't I know this?" Elena asked quietly. Marcus shrugged. "Because Mason doesn't talk about it. Ever. The only reason I know is because I processed his leave request 3 years ago. He's probably the most private person in this company." That night, Elena found herself thinking about Mason's question. What if I say yes? Maybe it hadn't been a joke at all. Maybe it had been a genuine question from a man who'd been alone for 3 years, carrying an impossible weight, wondering if someone might actually see him clearly enough to mean it. The next Monday, Elena did something impulsive. She stopped by the coffee shop across from Ellie's school at 5:45 p.m., telling herself it was just convenient, that she'd been in the neighborhood anyway. Through the window, she watched Mason emerge from the school building hand in hand with a whirlwind of a little girl in a purple backpack. Ellie was talking a mile a minute, her hands gesturing wildly as she recounted what appeared to be an epic playground drama. Mason listened with complete attention, nodding seriously at all the right moments, interjecting questions. They walked to a beat-up Honda Civic, and Mason opened the back door with practiced efficiency, waiting while Ellie climbed into her booster seat. Before starting the car, Mason pulled out his phone and made a quick call. Elena couldn't hear the words, but she saw him take notes, his expression shifting into work mode. He was clearly solving a problem, troubleshooting something urgent, all while Ellie sang to herself in the back seat. When he hung up, Mason sat for just a moment, his forehead resting against the steering wheel. Elena saw his shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath, the physical manifestation of switching gears, of summoning the energy to be present and patient in everything his daughter needed after a long day. Then he lifted his head, glanced in the rearview mirror at Ellie, smiled, and drove away. Elena sat in the coffee shop for another 20 minutes, her latte growing cold, thinking about the distance between who she'd assumed Mason Reed was and who he actually turned out to be. Their next real conversation happened by accident, or perhaps by inevitability. It was a Thursday evening, nearly 7 p.m., and Elena was still at the office chasing down revisions on the Riverside proposal. Most of the building was empty, the cleaning crew making their rounds with vacuum cleaners and disinfectant spray. Elena was contemplating ordering dinner when she passed by the fourth-floor break room and saw light spilling from the doorway. Mason was there, leaning against the counter, staring at the ancient microwave as it reheated something that smelled like chicken nuggets and disappointment. He looked exhausted, not the normal end-of-day tired, but the bone-deep weariness of someone running on empty. "Late night?" Elena asked from the doorway. Mason turned, surprise flickering across his face. "Could say the same to you. Don't CEOs have better things to do at 7 p.m. on a Thursday?" "You'd think," Elena replied, stepping into the break room. "But the Riverside team just sent over 43 pages of revisions that need responses by morning." "I know. I wrote 20 of them." Mason pulled his sad dinner from the microwave. "Ellie's at her friend Sarah's house tonight, sleepover. So I figured I'd stay late, get ahead on the Haverford timeline." Elena nodded, then heard herself say, "That looks terrible." Mason glanced at his plate. "It's gourmet frozen nuggets, Ellie's favorite. There's a Thai place 2 blocks away. They're still open, and I'm starving. The invitation hung in the air between them. Elena knew it was inappropriate, knew she was crossing lines that good managers didn't cross. But she was tired of pretending she wasn't curious about this man who'd somehow become the most interesting person in her company. Mason studied her for a long moment. Then he set down his plate and said, "Okay." The restaurant was nearly empty, just them and two other couples scattered across the dimly lit space. They ordered too much food: pad thai, green curry, spring rolls, mango sticky rice. And for the first few minutes, they maintained the safe territory of work talk. The Riverside merger timeline, the Haverford budget concerns, the new client proposal that marketing was developing. But somewhere between the spring rolls and the curry, the conversation shifted. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said. "Why do you work here?" Mason raised an eyebrow. Existential questions over Thai food. Bold choice. "I'm serious. You're talented enough to work anywhere. You could probably make twice your salary at a bigger firm, but you're here, working insane hours for standard pay, and you never ask for anything. Why?" Mason set down his chopsticks. For a moment, Elena thought he might deflect, give her the polite non-answer he probably gave everyone. Instead, he leaned back and said, "Stability, predictability. You run a good company, Elena. The work is challenging but not chaotic. The culture is professional but not toxic. I know what to expect, and that matters when you're raising a kid alone." "Tell me about her," Elena said quietly. "Ellie?" Something in Mason's expression softened. "She's 8, obsessed with dinosaurs and refuses to wear anything that isn't purple. She wants to be a paleontologist when she grows up, which she'll announce to anyone who'll listen. She's funny and stubborn and kind, and she's the best thing that ever happened to me." "Your wife," Elena began carefully, "Marcus mentioned that you—" "3 years ago," Mason said, his voice steady but quieter. "Sarah. We were married for 6 years. She was driving home from her sister's place, and a drunk driver crossed the median. She died before the ambulance arrived." "I'm so sorry." "Everyone is," Mason said without bitterness. "And I appreciate it. But sorry doesn't change anything. It doesn't make the mornings easier when Ellie wakes up crying because she dreamed about her mom. It doesn't help when other kids at school talk about family vacations and Ellie realizes she'll never have that again. Sorry is just a word people say when they don't know what else to offer." Elena felt the weight of his honesty like a physical thing. "What do you need then?" Instead of sorry, Mason met her eyes. "I don't need anything. I just need people to understand that my life is complicated, and my priorities are what they are. I can't stay late most nights. I can't do client dinners or networking events. I can't be the guy who goes above and beyond for the sake of appearances. But I will deliver excellent work, and I will be absolutely reliable within the boundaries I've set." "You are," Elena said. "You're probably the most reliable person in the company." "Then why are you curious about me?" Mason asked, and there was something almost challenging in his tone. "You've been watching me for 2 weeks, ever since that birthday thing. Why?" Elena felt her pulse quicken. "Because you're an enigma. Everyone else in that company, I understand their motivations. I know what drives them, what they want, how they operate. But you're competent and distant and totally self-contained. And that joke I made, except it wasn't entirely a joke, was it?" "Wasn't it?" Mason countered. "No," Elena admitted, surprising herself with the honesty. "I think part of me was testing something, seeing if you'd react, if there was anything underneath that perfect professional exterior." Mason leaned forward, and Elena was suddenly aware of how close they were across the small table. "And what did you find?" "That you're lonely," Elena said softly. "Just like I am. And that maybe we're both pretending to be fine when we're barely holding it together." For a long moment, Mason didn't speak. Then he said, "I can't do complicated, Elena. My life is already complicated enough. I'm not asking you to." "Aren't you?" Elena didn't have an answer for that. They finished their meal in quieter conversation, the intensity of the moment passing into something gentler. When Mason insisted on paying, "You got the last quarterly bonus wrong, you owe me," Elena laughed, and it felt good. Outside the restaurant, they stood in the cooling night air, and Elena felt the evening coming to an end with something like regret. This was nice, Mason said. Unexpected, but nice. We should do it again, Elena replied, then caught herself. I mean, not as a... I just meant... I know what you meant, Mason said, and that small smile appeared again. And yes, we should. He walked her to her car, waited while she unlocked it, then stepped back with a small wave. Elena drove home with her mind spinning, replaying every word, every glance, every moment of connection. She was in trouble, deep trouble, and the worst part was she couldn't bring herself to care. Over the next 3 weeks, Elena and Mason fell into a pattern that both of them pretended was casual. Coffee meetings that ran long, late-night strategy sessions that somehow turned into philosophical debates, text exchanges about work that detoured into personal territory. Mason told her about Ellie's obsession with a YouTube channel about dinosaur facts, and how he'd had to learn the difference between a Brachiosaurus and a Brontosaurus to keep up with her expertise. Elena shared her anxieties about the Riverside merger, the pressure from the board, the constant fear that one wrong move would topple everything she'd built. They never explicitly acknowledged what was happening. It was safer that way, maintaining the fiction that they were just colleagues who happened to enjoy each other's company. But the office noticed. It started with small things. Jennifer from marketing making knowing comments about how much time Elena spent consulting with Mason. Derek Shaw's increasingly pointed remarks during meetings about favoritism and inappropriate relationships. The way conversations would stop when Elena and Mason entered a room together. Elena knew she should pull back. She was putting them both at risk. Her reputation, his job, the professional environment she'd worked so hard to maintain. But every time she resolved to create distance, Mason would look at her with those steady gray eyes, or make a dry observation that only she seemed to find funny, and her resolve would crumble. Then came the day that changed everything. Elena was in her office reviewing contracts when Marcus knocked urgently. "We have a situation." "What kind of situation?" "The Riverside merger. Someone leaked our proposal to their competitor. The whole strategy, the pricing structure, everything. It hit their inbox this morning." Elena's blood went cold. "How?" "It is tracking it now, but Elena..." Marcus hesitated. "The leak came from inside. Someone with access to the confidential files sent it directly." "Who has access?" "Senior management. About 15 people." Marcus paused. "Including Mason Reed." Elena felt the floor tilt beneath her. "No, absolutely not. Mason wouldn't... I'm just telling you what IT found. I'm not making accusations." But Marcus's expression said otherwise. By noon, the whispers had started. By 2 p.m., Derek Shaw was in her office with what he called concerns. By 4 p.m., the board had called an emergency meeting for first thing Monday morning. And Mason arrived at her office at 4:30, his face pale. "They think I did it," he said without preamble. "Did you?" The hurt in his eyes nearly broke her. "No. But someone set it up to look like I did. Elena, I got an email 2 days ago with what I thought was an updated version of the Riverside file. I opened it, scanned it, filed it. I didn't send it anywhere. I didn't share it with anyone. But now IT says that email came from an external source, and opening it triggered some kind of forwarding protocol. You were hacked? Or framed? I don't know. But I need you to believe me." Elena wanted to. God, she wanted to. But she was also a CEO with a board that was already questioning her judgment, with a merger worth millions hanging in the balance, with 15 other employees who were watching to see how she'd handle this. "I believe you," she said quietly, "but I don't know if that matters." Mason's expression shuddered. "I see." "Mason, wait." But he was already walking out, and Elena knew, she knew, that something fundamental had just broken between them. The emergency board meeting on Monday morning was brutal. The facts were damning. Mason had accessed the confidential file 2 days before it was leaked. His computer showed the forwarding activity. The recipient was a known contact at Riverside's competitor, and when questioned, Mason couldn't provide any evidence that he'd been set up beyond his word. "Terminate him," board member Richard Thornton said flatly. "Immediately. This is exactly the kind of liability we can't afford." "We should investigate further," Elena countered. This doesn't match his pattern. Mason Reed has been with this company for 4 years with an impeccable record. He's never shown any indication of what? Thornton interrupted. Of being disloyal? Elena, forgive me, but we've all noticed your friendship with Mr. Reed. Are you sure your judgment isn't compromised here? Elena felt ice slide down her spine. My personal feelings have nothing to do with this. Don't they? This was Margaret Chen, another board member. Because from where we're sitting, it looks like you've been spending quite a bit of time with the man we're now investigating. Late-night dinners, coffee meetings, private consultations. If there's something going on between you two, it opens us up to liability on multiple fronts. There is nothing going on, Elena said, hating how defensive she sounded. Mason Reed is a valued employee who I believe is innocent. Then prove it, Thornton said, because right now all the evidence points to him. And if you can't handle this objectively, we'll find someone who can. Elena left that meeting with an ultimatum. She had 1 week to resolve the situation. Either clear Mason's name with concrete evidence or terminate him and launch a formal investigation. If she failed to do either, the board would vote on her removal as CEO. She'd built this company from nothing. 7 years of sleepless nights, impossible risks, sacrificing every personal relationship for the sake of growth. And now it was all at risk because she'd been careless enough to care about someone. But even as she thought it, Elena knew that wasn't fair. She didn't regret knowing Mason. She regretted that the world was structured in a way that made their connection dangerous. That afternoon, Elena called Mason to her office. The gossip mill was already churning. Everyone knew something was happening, even if they didn't know exactly what. Mason entered looking exhausted but composed. I'm assuming this isn't good news. The board wants you terminated, Elena said directly. I bought us a week. Either I clear your name or I have to let you go. Or they remove you, Mason said, reading between the lines. That's not your concern. Isn't it? Mason moved closer. Elena, this is your company. Your life's work. Don't sacrifice it for me. I'm not sacrificing anything. I'm pursuing the truth, which I can't prove. I have no evidence beyond my word, and my word clearly isn't enough. Mason's voice was bitter. This is exactly what I was afraid of, getting close to you, having people notice, and then when something went wrong, being unable to separate the professional from the personal. So what are you saying? I'm saying maybe I should just resign. Make this clean. You can tell the board I left voluntarily, the investigation ends, and you keep your company. No, Elena said sharply. Absolutely not. You didn't do anything wrong, and I will not let you fall on your sword because someone else committed a crime. Then what's your plan? Mason asked. Because I'm out of ideas, and I'm running out of savings, and I have a daughter who needs me to keep my job. Elena had been thinking about this all weekend. I'm ordering an independent forensic audit, complete IT investigation, email trail analysis, everything. If someone framed you, there will be digital fingerprints. We'll find them. And if we don't, then we figure out our next move. But I'm not giving up on this, Mason. I'm not giving up on you. The words hung in the air with too much weight. Mason looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his eyes. Then he nodded once. Okay. 1 week, botched. The next 5 days were the longest of Elena's life. She hired the best cybersecurity firm in the city, costing a small fortune from her personal funds because she couldn't authorize company money without board approval. The forensic team descended on Crestwell Dynamics like digital archaeologists, examining every server, every email, every file access log. Meanwhile, Elena suspended Mason with pay pending investigation. It was the only move that made sense. Keeping him in the office would look like favoritism. Terminating him would be premature. But watching him leave that day, seeing the judgment in other employees' eyes, made her feel like a traitor. The whispers got worse. She overheard Jennifer in the break room. I knew something was going on between them. Derek Shaw made pointed comments in meetings about distraction and compromised leadership. Even Marcus looked worried. At night, Elena lay awake running scenarios. What if the audit found nothing? What if Mason really had been involved and she'd been completely wrong about him? What if clearing his name meant destroying her own credibility? But every time doubt crept in, she remembered Mason making silly faces for his daughter on that video call. The weariness in his eyes when he talked about being sorry, the way he'd looked at her in the Thai restaurant and said, "I can't do complicated." She'd made his life complicated. The least she could do was fix it. On day 3, Elena got her first break. The forensic team found the email that Mason had received, the one with the supposedly updated Riverside file. It had been sent from an external address that was designed to look like it came from IT support. The sending patterns matched classic phishing attempts. Someone definitely targeted him, the lead investigator told Elena. This wasn't random. They knew his access level, his patterns, his likely behavior. This was personal. Can you trace who sent it? We're working on it. But whoever did this was sophisticated. They used VPNs, routing protocols, multiple proxy servers. It's going to take time. Time Elena didn't have. On day 5, Mason texted her. Interview tomorrow. Tech firm in Boston. Good salary, remote work mostly. They don't care about allegations without proof. Elena's heart sank. Don't take it yet, please. I have 2 days of savings left, Elena. I can't afford principals. She understood. God, she understood. But the thought of him leaving, of this ending with him having to uproot Ellie's entire life because someone had deliberately sabotaged him, was unbearable. That night, Elena went back to the office at 10 p.m. She'd dismissed the forensic team for the evening, but she couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking. She pulled up the file logs herself, scrolling through months of access records, looking for anything unusual. And then she saw it. Derek Shaw, accessing the Riverside files at odd hours. Always just after Mason had been in them, creating a pattern that looked like he was shadowing Mason's work. And 3 weeks ago, 2 days before the phishing email was sent to Mason, Derek had accessed the external vendor database, the same database that contained email formats and IT protocols. Elena's hands shook as she pulled up Derek's financial records, the ones she had access to as CEO for compliance purposes. Large deposits, 6 of them over the past year, each around $15,000, all from a shell company she didn't recognize. She called the forensic team leader at 11 p.m. I need you back here. Now. I think I found something. The final piece fell into place at 3 a.m. on day 6. Derek Shaw had been embezzling company funds for 18 months through fraudulent vendor contracts. Small amounts, carefully hidden, routed through shell companies he controlled. But the Riverside merger would have triggered a complete financial audit, one that would have exposed everything. So Derek had created a distraction. Frame Mason Reed for leaking confidential information, cause chaos, derail the merger, buy time to cover his tracks. He'd known about Elena's growing friendship with Mason, everyone had, and calculated that she'd either sacrifice Mason to save the company or defend him and lose credibility. Either way, Derek wins. What Derek hadn't counted on was Elena refusing to play his game, or spending her own money on an investigation, or being angry enough to dig until she found the truth. By dawn, Elena had a complete dossier. The forensic evidence, the financial records, the digital trail linking Derek to both the embezzlement and the frame job. It was ironclad, documented, undeniable. She called an emergency company meeting for 9 a.m. All staff, mandatory attendance. Then she called Mason. Come to the office, she said when he answered, his voice groggy with sleep. Don't go to that interview. Just trust me. Elena, please, one more day. That's all I'm asking. A pause, then, okay, one more day. At 9 a.m. on day 7, Elena stood in front of her entire company. 163 employees crammed into the main conference hall. She saw Mason slip in at the back, his expression guarded. Derek Shaw sat in the third row, looking supremely confident. Thank you all for coming, Elena began, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. I know there have been a lot of rumors about what happened with the Riverside merger leak. Today, I'm here to set the record straight. She pulled up the presentation she'd prepared. Slide after slide of evidence, carefully documented, clearly presented. Mason Reed was framed. The leak was orchestrated by someone in this company who had both the access and the motive to sabotage our operations. That person is Derek Shaw. The room erupted. Derek jumped to his feet, his face red. This is insane. You're protecting him because you're sleeping with him. No, Elena said coldly. I'm exposing you because you committed fraud, embezzlement, and corporate espionage. And I have 18 months of documentation to prove it. She detailed everything: the fake vendor contracts, the shell companies, the phishing scheme, the financial deposits. With each revelation, Derek's face went from red to pale. People started moving away from him in their seats, as if guilt might be contagious. Security is contacting the police as we speak, Elena continued. Derek Shaw is terminated effective immediately and will be facing criminal charges. And Mason Reed, she found him in the crowd, his expression stunned. Mason Reed is cleared of all wrongdoing, reinstated to his position with full back pay, and will receive a formal apology from both me and the board. The room was silent for a heartbeat. Then someone started clapping. Jennifer, of all people. Then Marcus joined in. Then everyone. The applause building until the entire company was standing, and Derek Shaw was being escorted out by security, and Elena felt 3 years' worth of tension finally released from her shoulders. After the meeting, after the chaos of police statements and board calls and damage control, Elena found herself alone in her office at nearly 7 p.m. She was exhausted, emotionally wrung out, barely holding together. Then Mason knocked on her door. He stepped inside and closed it behind him. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. You saved me, Mason said finally. You risked everything to clear my name. I pursued the truth, Elena corrected. That's what you do when you care about someone. Elena, I know, she interrupted. I know this is complicated. I know you have Ellie to think about and your own peace, and that getting involved with your boss is probably the last thing you need. But I need you to know that I care about you, Mason. Not as an employee, not as a project, as a person. And I'm tired of pretending otherwise. Mason crossed the room in 3 strides and kissed her. It wasn't gentle or tentative or testing. It was fierce and certain and tasted like relief. Elena melted into it, her hands finding his shoulders, all the tension of the past week transforming into something bright and overwhelming. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Mason rested his forehead against hers. I care about you too. I have for a while. But this is terrifying. I know. If we do this, really do this, it changes everything. I know. And there's Ellie. She has to come first. Always. I wouldn't expect anything else, Elena whispered. Mason, I'm not asking you to make your life more complicated. I'm asking if maybe we can figure out how to make it better, together. Mason pulled back to look at her, really look at her, and Elena saw the moment he made his decision. Okay, he said. Let's try. And just like that, in the wreckage of sabotage and betrayal and corporate warfare, something new and fragile and precious began to grow. The kiss in Elena's office marked a beginning, but it didn't erase the complications that had been building around them like storm clouds. When they finally pulled apart, still catching their breath, the weight of reality settled back onto their shoulders with familiar heaviness. We need to be careful, Elena said, her voice still unsteady. The board is already questioning my judgment. If this becomes public knowledge right now— I know, Mason interrupted gently. We take this slow. Keep it private. Figure out what this is before we worry about what everyone else thinks. Elena nodded, grateful for his understanding even as part of her resented the need for secrecy. She'd spent her entire career being bold, decisive, unapologetic. But this was different. This wasn't just about her anymore. Mason checked his watch and winced. I need to get Ellie. Sarah's mom was watching her, but I'm already 20 minutes late. Go, Elena said, stepping back to give him space. We'll figure this out tomorrow, or the day after. Whenever. He paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression that made her heart ache. Thank you for everything you did. I know what it cost you. Then he was gone, and Elena was alone with the lingering warmth of his kiss and the cold reality of what came next. The fallout from Derek Shaw's arrest dominated the next week. Police investigations, board meetings, damage control with clients, media inquiries about the scandal. Elena barely had time to breathe, let alone think about her personal life. She caught glimpses of Mason in meetings, exchanged brief texts about work matters, but they didn't have another private moment. It was probably for the best, Elena told herself. They both needed space to process what had happened, to figure out if that kiss had been genuine connection or just the adrenaline rush of survival. But late at night, alone in her apartment with a glass of wine she was too tired to drink, Elena replayed that moment in her office over and over. The certainty in Mason's eyes, the way he'd crossed the room like he'd been waiting for permission, the feeling of finally being seen by someone who understood the weight she carried. On Thursday evening, 10 days after Derek's arrest, Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Mason. Ellie wants to meet you, properly, not just a glimpse in a coffee shop window. Elena's heart jumped into her throat. She typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on, "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "No," Mason replied, "but she keeps asking about the pretty lady who helped Daddy, and I'm tired of lying to her about things that matter." They agreed on Saturday afternoon at a park near Mason's apartment. Neutral territory, Elena thought. Low pressure. If it went badly, they could part ways without making it weird. She changed outfits 4 times that morning, finally settling on jeans and a casual sweater that hopefully said approachable adult rather than terrifying CEO. She arrived at the park 15 minutes early and spent that time sitting on a bench, watching other families, wondering what she was doing. She'd never wanted children, had always been clear about that in past relationships. Her career had been her baby, Crestwell Dynamics her legacy. The idea of being responsible for another human life had always felt like too much, too complicated, too likely to end in failure. But that was before Mason. Before she understood that loving someone meant caring about the people they loved too. "She's nervous," Mason's voice came from behind her. "Fair warning." Elena turned to see him approaching with Ellie, who was indeed dressed head to toe in purple as advertised. The little girl had Mason's gray eyes and a determined set to her chin that suggested she'd inherited his stubbornness. "Hi," Elena said, keeping her voice gentle. "I'm Elena." Ellie studied her with the unnerving directness of children who haven't learned to hide their thoughts yet. "You're the one who made the bad man go away." "I helped," Elena corrected. "Your dad did a lot of the work, too." "Daddy says you're very smart and also very brave." Ellie tilted her head. "Are you his girlfriend?" Mason made a choking sound. Elena felt heat creep up her neck. "That's complicated." "That means yes," Ellie announced with the confidence of someone who'd cracked a code. "Sarah's mom says when adults say, 'It's complicated,' it means yes, but they don't want to admit it." "Sarah's mom sounds very wise," Elena managed, trying not to laugh. They walked through the park together, Ellie chattering about her dinosaur obsession, pointing out every dog they passed and providing detailed assessments of their breeds. Mason hung back slightly, letting Elena and his daughter find their rhythm, intervening only when Ellie's enthusiasm threatened to overwhelm. At the playground, Ellie demanded that Elena push her on the swings. "Daddy always pushes too high, and it makes my tummy feel weird." "I do not," Mason protested, but he was smiling. Elena pushed the swing in careful arcs, listening to Ellie's giggles, and felt something inside her chest crack open. She'd spent so long focused on achievement, on building and winning and proving herself, that she'd forgotten what simple joy felt like, being present in a moment without agenda or strategy. After an hour, Ellie announced she was hungry, and they relocated to a nearby diner that apparently served the world's best grilled cheese, according to 8-year-old standards. Elena sat across from Mason and Ellie in a cracked vinyl booth, eating mediocre fries and watching father and daughter bicker good-naturedly about whether dinosaurs could have survived the modern climate, and thought, This is what people mean when they talk about happiness." When Ellie excused herself to the bathroom, Mason reached across the table and squeezed Elena's hand. "Thank you for this. For trying." "She's wonderful," Elena said honestly. "You've done an incredible job with her." "Most days I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water," Mason admitted. "The homework battles, the friendship dramas, the constant negotiating about bedtime, it's exhausting and terrifying, and I never know if I'm doing it right." "You're doing it right," Elena assured him. "Trust me. That kid is happy and confident and knows she's loved. That's all that matters." Mason's expression softened into something tender and vulnerable. "I really like you, Elena Ward." "I really like you too, Mason Reed." Ellie returned then, demanding more fries and launching into a story about her friend Madison's birthday party, and the moment passed. But Elena held on to it, that simple declaration in a diner booth, like a talisman against the complications she knew were coming, because they were coming. The whispers at work hadn't stopped just because Derek was gone. If anything, they'd intensified. Jennifer cornered Elena in the break room on Monday, her expression carefully concerned. "So, about Mason Reed, are you two—" I'm not judging, but people are talking." "Let them talk," Elena said coolly. "Mason was vindicated. The investigation proved his innocence. What else matters?" "Elena, come on, we're friends. You can tell me the truth." Jennifer lowered her voice. "Are you dating him?" Elena considered lying, considered deflecting or changing the subject, or pulling rank and reminding Jennifer that her personal life was none of her business. Instead, she said, "I'm trying to figure out what we are, and I'd appreciate if people could give us space to do that without turning it into office gossip." Jennifer's eyes widened. "Oh my God, you are! Elena, good for you, honestly. Mason seems great. But you know this is going to be a thing, right? The CEO dating an employee? HR is going to have a field day." "Mason doesn't report to me directly," Elena pointed out. "He reports to the VP of Operations. Technically, there's no conflict of interest." "Technically," Jennifer repeated with a knowing look. "But perception matters, especially for someone in your position." She wasn't wrong. Elena knew she wasn't wrong. But the alternative, walking away from Mason, pretending that kiss hadn't happened, going back to her carefully controlled life where she was married to her work and nothing else mattered, felt impossible now. She'd had a taste of what connection could be, and she couldn't unknow it. That evening, Elena called an emergency meeting with her HR director, Patricia Chen, a formidable woman in her 50s who'd been with the company since the beginning. "I need to disclose a potential relationship," Elena said without preamble. "With Mason Reed." Patricia's expression didn't change. "How long?" "Technically, a week. Realistically, it's been building for months." "And you're aware of the optics? A CEO dating someone who reports, however indirectly, to her?" "I'm aware. Which is why I'm here. I want to do this right, Patricia. Document everything, establish clear boundaries, make sure there's no actual conflict of interest. I won't give the board ammunition to question my leadership." Patricia studied her for a long moment. "You care about him." It wasn't a question, but Elena answered anyway. "Yes, more than I expected to care about anyone." "Then here's what we do," Patricia said, pulling out a legal pad. "First, full disclosure to the board. No surprises. Second, we establish clear protocols. Mason doesn't work on any projects where you're directly involved in decision-making. Third, regular check-ins with HR to ensure no perception of favoritism. And fourth," she looked up, her expression gentle, "you accept that some people will never see this as anything but inappropriate, regardless of what safeguards we put in place." Elena felt the weight of that reality settle over her. "I know. The question is he worth it?" Without hesitation, Elena said, "Yes." The board meeting the following Tuesday was as uncomfortable as Elena had anticipated. She presented her disclosure with clinical precision, relationship status, timeline, proposed protocols to prevent conflicts of interest. Most of the board members listened with varying degrees of skepticism. Richard Thornton was the first to speak. "Elena, with all due respect, this is a disaster waiting to happen. You've just weathered one scandal. Jumping into a relationship with the man at the center of that scandal makes you look either reckless or compromised." "Mason wasn't at the center of the scandal," Elena corrected sharply. "He was the victim of it. A victim I helped vindicate because I pursued evidence rather than assumptions. My judgment was sound then, and it's sound now." "Is it?" Margaret Chen leaned forward. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you developed feelings for an employee and then moved heaven and earth to save him. That's not sound judgment. That's emotional compromise." "I developed feelings for a man who happened to be an employee," Elena shot back. "And I saved him because he was innocent. Those are two separate facts that happen to overlap. If you're suggesting I should have let an innocent man be destroyed to avoid the appearance of impropriety, then we have fundamentally different values." The argument went in circles for another 20 minutes before Patricia Chen intervened with the proposed protocols. The board reluctantly agreed to allow the relationship to continue with strict oversight, but Elena could see the judgment in their eyes. She'd lost credibility. Maybe not enough to lose her position, but enough to make everything harder. When she left that meeting, Elena felt drained and angry and afraid. She'd known there would be pushback, but facing the reality of colleagues and board members she respected questioning her character was harder than she'd anticipated. Mason was waiting in her office when she returned. He took one look at her face and said, "That bad?" "They think I'm compromised, that I can't separate my personal feelings from professional judgment." Elena collapsed into her chair. "Maybe they're right." "They're not," Mason said firmly. "You cleared me because the evidence cleared me. If anything, you went harder on the investigation because you were worried about bias. That's not compromise. That's integrity." "Tell that to Richard Thornton." Mason came around the desk and pulled her into a hug. Elena let herself lean into him, breathing in his familiar scent of coffee and detergent and something uniquely Mason. "We can stop this," he said quietly. "If it's going to destroy what you've built, we can walk away. Go back to being colleagues." Elena pulled back to look at him. "Is that what you want?" "God, no. But I don't want to be the reason you lose everything either." "You're not," Elena said. "They are. The people who can't see past their own narrow definitions of appropriate. The people who think I can't possibly make good decisions and also have feelings. Screw them." A small smile tugged at Mason's mouth. "That's the Elena Ward I know." They kissed then, slow and deliberate, a reaffirmation of the choice they were making despite the cost. When they finally separated, Elena felt steadier, more certain. "We do this right," she said. "We follow every protocol, we're transparent about everything, and we don't give them any ammunition. But we don't hide either. I'm done apologizing for caring about you." "Okay," Mason agreed. "But Elena, we need to be smart. The board is watching for any excuse. If we screw this up, they'll crucify both of us." He was right, of course, which made what happened next so much worse. It started innocently enough. Mason's team was leading the development of a new client proposal for a major tech company, and the pitch meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks out. It was important work, high stakes, but nothing unusual. Elena wasn't directly involved. She'd established clear boundaries about Mason's projects to avoid any appearance of favoritism. But then the VP of Operations got pneumonia and was out for 2 weeks, and Mason's proposal needed executive sign-off before it could proceed. And Elena, as CEO, was the logical person to provide that approval. She knew it looked bad. New people would talk. But the work was solid, exceptional, actually, and delaying it would mean losing the client. So Elena reviewed the proposal, made some strategic suggestions, and approved it for presentation. Within hours, the gossip network had exploded. "Did you hear Elena fast-tracked Mason's project? She's giving him special treatment." "This is exactly what we were worried about." Jennifer approached Elena that afternoon, looking uncomfortable. "Boss, I need to tell you something. There's a petition circulating. Some of the senior staff are threatening to go to the board if they think you're showing favoritism toward Mason." Elena felt cold fury wash through her. "Based on what evidence?" "The proposal approval. The fact that you overrode some concerns from the technical team." "I didn't override concerns. I asked for clarifications which were provided and then made a decision based on merit. That's literally my job." "I know," Jennifer said quickly. "I'm not saying it's fair. I'm just giving you a heads up that people are watching every move you make." That evening, Elena called Mason. "We have a problem." She explained the situation, the petition, the accusations of favoritism. Mason listened in silence, and when she finished, his voice was tight. "This is my fault. I should have asked someone else to review the proposal." There was no one else, and the work deserved approval. Elena rubbed her temples. "Mason, they're going to weaponize everything we do, every interaction, every decision, every moment we spend together. We can be completely ethical, and it won't matter." "So what do we do?" "I don't know," Elena admitted, and hated the defeat in her voice. "I really don't know." The next day, Patricia Chen appeared in Elena's office with a grim expression. "The petition hit the board's inbox this morning. 15 signatures from senior staff claiming you're creating a hostile work environment through favoritism." "That's insane." "That's perception," Patricia corrected. "And perception is reality in corporate governance. Elena, I need to ask you directly. Have you given Mason any preferential treatment? No. Every decision I've made regarding his work has been based on merit. You can audit every approval, every project assignment, every evaluation. I've been hyper-aware of avoiding even the appearance of bias. I believe you, Patricia said, but the board is going to investigate anyway, and in the meantime, they're suggesting you recuse yourself from any decisions involving Mason's work. That's ridiculous. He's a project manager. His work intersects with executive decisions constantly. I know, but if you fight this, it's going to look like you're prioritizing your relationship over the company's well-being. Patricia's expression was sympathetic. Elena, you're in an impossible position. Either you distance yourself from Mason professionally, which undermines him and feeds the perception that he needs your protection, or you maintain normal professional interactions and get accused of favoritism. Elena wanted to scream, wanted to rage against the unfairness of a system that scrutinized her every move while male executives dated employees with impunity, wanted to demand why her competence was constantly questioned while mediocre men were given endless benefit of the doubt. Instead, she said, set up the investigation, full audit of every decision I've made regarding Mason since we started, whatever this is. I want everything documented and transparent. And Mason? I'll talk to him. That conversation happened in Elena's car in the parking garage after work, both of them too exhausted and paranoid for privacy anywhere else. They're auditing every decision I've made about you, Elena said without preamble, looking for evidence of favoritism. Mason's jaw tightened. They won't find any. I know, but the investigation itself is damaging. It reinforces the narrative that there's something inappropriate happening. Which there isn't. We've followed every protocol. We've been more careful than most people are with actual conflicts of interest. Doesn't matter, Elena said bitterly. Perception trumps reality, always. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of it all pressing down. Finally, Mason spoke. Maybe we should end this. Not us. We can still be together. But I could find another job. Remove the complication. You love your job, and you shouldn't have to leave because people can't handle the idea of me having a personal life. But if staying means destroying your career, then we fight, Elena interrupted. I'm not letting them win, Mason. I'm not letting them force me to choose between you and my company. We did nothing wrong. We're going to prove that, and then we're going to keep living our lives. Mason reached for her hand. You're sure about this? No, Elena admitted. I'm terrified. But I'm also tired of letting fear make my decisions. The investigation took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of Elena feeling like she was under a microscope, of every meeting being watched, every email analyzed. The auditors interviewed her staff, reviewed her decisions, examined her calendar for any suspicious patterns, and they found nothing. Because there was nothing to find. The final report concluded that Elena Ward had maintained appropriate professional boundaries, made decisions based on merit, and shown no evidence of favoritism toward Mason Reed. If anything, she'd been harder on his work than others, possibly overcompensating to avoid any appearance of bias. Elena should have felt vindicated. Instead, she felt exhausted and cynical. Because she knew the report wouldn't change minds. The people who wanted to believe she was compromised would continue believing it. The board would continue watching her every move, and she and Mason would have to navigate a minefield of perception for as long as they stayed together. At least we survived, Mason said when she told him the results. They were at his apartment, their first real privacy in weeks, and Ellie was at a sleepover. That counts for something. Does it? Elena asked. Because it feels like we're constantly defending ourselves for having feelings. I'm so tired, Mason. I'm tired of justifying every decision, tired of people whispering, tired of feeling like I have to choose between my career and you. Mason pulled her close. You don't have to choose. We'll figure this out. How? Every option feels impossible. Then we find a new option, one that doesn't exist yet. Mason tilted her chin up. Elena, I know this is hard. I know you're carrying weight that isn't fair, but I'm not going anywhere. We're going to make this work because the alternative, not having you in my life, is worse than anything the board or the gossips can throw at us. Elena wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that love could overcome institutional barriers and small-minded judgment. But she'd spent too many years in corporate America to be that naive. Still, when Mason kissed her, slow and thorough and full of promise, Elena let herself hope. Just a little. Just enough to keep fighting. They were still figuring out logistics when everything shifted again. This time, the threat came from outside. Elena arrived at work Monday morning to find Patricia Chen waiting with bad news. "We have a situation. Someone leaked your relationship to the press. TechCrunch is running a story tomorrow about CEO Elena Ward dating an employee who was recently investigated for corporate espionage." Elena's blood ran cold. "What?" "The angle is messy, implies you cleared Mason because you were romantically involved, suggests the whole Derek Shaw thing was a cover-up, questions your leadership. It's sensationalist garbage, but it's going to cause problems." "Who leaked it?" "We don't know, but it had to be someone internal with knowledge of both the investigation and your relationship." Elena's mind raced through possibilities. Someone still loyal to Derek? A disgruntled employee? A board member trying to force her out? The list of suspects was depressingly long. "Get ahead of it," she told Patricia. "I'll make a statement, transparent, honest, showing we have nothing to hide." "Elena, are you sure? Once you confirm the relationship publicly, you can't take it back." "I know, but I'm done hiding. If they're going to come after me, I'm not going to give them the satisfaction of shame." She called Mason immediately. "The press knows. There's going to be an article. I'm making a statement, and I need to know you're okay with that." Mason was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do you need from me?" "Just be prepared. For questions, for attention, for Ellie potentially hearing things at school. I'll talk to her tonight. Explain that sometimes people say mean things about people they don't understand." Mason paused. "Elena, I'm with you. Whatever you need to do, I support it." Elena felt something in her chest unknot slightly. "Thank you." That afternoon, Elena released a statement through the company's PR firm. Brief, professional, acknowledging the relationship while emphasizing the protocols in place to prevent conflicts of interest. She cited the investigation results, the established boundaries, the complete transparency she'd maintained throughout. The article ran the next day anyway. It was as bad as Patricia had predicted, heavily implying impropriety, using loaded language, painting Elena as either corrupt or foolish. The comments section was worse. Strangers weighing in on her choices, her character, her relationship. Some supportive, most critical, all invasive. By noon, Elena's email was flooded with media requests. By 2 p.m., the board had called another emergency meeting. By 4 p.m., Elena was standing in front of Richard Thornton, being told that her relationship with Mason Reed had become a liability the company could no longer afford. "You need to end it," Thornton said flatly, "or we'll have no choice but to ask for your resignation." Elena felt the room tilt. "You're giving me an ultimatum? Choose between my personal life and my job? We're asking you to consider what's best for the company you built. This scandal is damaging our reputation, affecting client relationships, creating internal division. If you truly care about Crestwell Dynamics, you'll do what's necessary." "What's necessary is supporting your CEO rather than throwing her under the bus for having a relationship," Elena shot back. "I've done nothing wrong. Neither has Mason. And if you can't see that, then maybe I'm not the problem here." The meeting ended badly, with Elena refusing to agree to their demands and the board threatening to vote on her removal. As she walked back to her office, Elena felt something crystallize inside her, a clarity she hadn't had before. She'd spent 7 years building Crestwell Dynamics, had sacrificed relationships, health, personal happiness in service of growth, had poured everything she had into making this company successful. And now they wanted her to sacrifice more, to give up the first real connection she'd had in years because it made them uncomfortable. Maybe it was time to stop sacrificing. That evening, Elena drove to Mason's apartment unannounced. He opened the door looking concerned. "I saw the article. Are you okay?" "No," Elena said honestly. "The board wants me to end our relationship or resign." Mason's face went pale. "Then we end it." "Elena, I'm not letting you lose your company over me." "What if I want to?" "Want to what?" "Lose it. Walk away. Build something new." Elena stepped inside, her mind racing with possibilities she'd never allowed herself to consider. "Mason, I've been thinking. Crestwell Dynamics was my life because I had nothing else. But now I have you, and Ellie. and the possibility of something that matters more than quarterly earnings and board approval. Elena, you're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, she interrupted. They're never going to accept this. The board, the gossips, the people who think I should apologize for being human. I can keep fighting them, keep proving myself over and over, keep living in fear that one wrong move will destroy everything, or I can choose differently. Mason stared at her. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe it's time to step away. Not forever, just long enough to figure out what I really want. I have savings, I have reputation, I could consult or start something new or just take time to breathe for the first time in a decade. Elena moved closer. I'm saying that you and Ellie matter more to me than a corner office and a title. You don't mean that. I do, Elena said, and realized with stunning clarity that it was true. I really do. They stood facing each other in Mason's small living room, and Elena felt the future stretching out before them. Uncertain, yes, but also full of possibility. For the first time since that birthday joke in the conference room, she wasn't afraid of what came next. Mason caught Elena's hands, his expression torn between hope and terror. Elena, stop. You're talking about walking away from everything you've built because some closed-minded people can't handle the fact that you're in a relationship. That's not a solution. That's letting them win. Maybe letting them win is the same as choosing myself for once, Elena said quietly. Maybe I've been so busy proving I belong in that world that I forgot to ask if I even want to be there anymore. Before Mason could respond, a small voice came from the hallway. Daddy, who's here? They both turned to see Ellie standing in her dinosaur pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Elena's heart sank. I'm sorry. I didn't know she was home. I thought, Sarah's mom got sick, had to cancel the sleepover. Mason moved toward his daughter. Hey, sweetheart, Elena just stopped by to talk about work stuff. Let's get you back to bed. But Ellie was studying Elena with those unnervingly perceptive gray eyes. You look sad. Did someone make you sad? Elena felt her composure crack slightly. Some people are being unkind, but I'll be okay. Is it because of us? Ellie asked, and the question held more understanding than any 8-year-old should have. Because you like Daddy, and some people think you shouldn't? Mason and Elena exchanged startled looks. Ellie, how do you... I'm not stupid, Ellie said with the indignation of a child tired of being underestimated. I heard you on the phone yesterday talking to Grandma about how people at work were being mean to Elena because she's your girlfriend, and Sarah's mom always talks really loud to her friends. And I heard her say something about that CEO woman dating her employee and how it was inappropriate. She stumbled slightly over the big word but got it out. Mason looked stricken. Ellie, I'm sorry. You shouldn't have had to hear any of that. But it's true, right? People are being mean to Elena because of us? Ellie's eyes were suddenly shining with tears. That's not fair. She helped us. She made the bad man go away. Why would people be mean to her? Elena felt something inside her chest compress painfully. She knelt down to Ellie's eye level. Sometimes grown-ups have rules about things that don't make a lot of sense, and when someone breaks those rules, even if they're not hurting anyone, other grown-ups get upset. That's what's happening to me. So what are you going to do? Ellie asked. It was such a simple question, direct, honest, expecting nothing less than the truth, and suddenly Elena knew with absolute certainty what she had to do. I'm going to fight, Elena said, not with anger or by trying to prove everyone wrong, but by showing them that people can care about each other and still do good work, that I can love your dad and still be good at my job, even if they don't believe it right now. Ellie considered this seriously. That sounds really hard. It is, Elena admitted, but the things worth fighting for usually are. Something in Ellie's expression shifted then, the fear giving way to determination. Then I'll help. I can tell people you're nice and that you make Daddy smile more. That's important data. Despite everything, Elena laughed. Important data? You sound like your dad. She watches too many science documentaries, Mason said, but his voice was thick with emotion. After they got Ellie back to bed, a process that involved 3 glasses of water, 2 bathroom trips, and 1 lengthy negotiation about whether dinosaurs could have been good pets, Mason and Elena finally had their conversation. They sat on his worn couch with mugs of tea neither of them drank, and the weight of impossible decisions pressing down. I meant what I said earlier, Elena started, about being willing to walk away from Crestwell. But Ellie made me realize something. If I run now, I'm teaching her that when things get hard, you give up, that you let bullies win, and that's not the lesson I want to model. So you're staying? Mason asked carefully. I'm staying, and I'm fighting, but Mason, I need you to understand what that means. It's going to get worse before it gets better. The press attention, the gossip, the scrutiny. They're going to dig into your life, my life, looking for anything they can weaponize. It's going to be exhausting and invasive and probably painful. Mason was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, My wife died 3 years ago in a car accident. For months afterward, I felt like I was drowning, like the weight of grief and responsibility and just surviving day to day was going to crush me. Everyone kept telling me it would get easier, and I didn't believe them because I couldn't imagine anything ever feeling manageable again. Elena waited, sensing he needed to work through this at his own pace. But then, one morning, I woke up and realized Ellie was laughing at something on TV, and I could hear that sound without it hurting. And I thought, okay, maybe this is how healing works. Not some dramatic transformation, just small moments of being okay accumulating until you have more okay days than terrible ones. Mason turned to face her fully. What I'm saying is, I know about hard things. I know about pushing through when everything feels impossible. And if you're willing to fight for this, for us, then so am I. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Even if it means more scrutiny? More people making assumptions about you? Even then. Because Elena, you stood in front of your entire company and cleared my name when it would have been easier to let me burn. You risked your reputation for me. The least I can do is stand beside you while you fight for both of us. They kissed then, soft and salt-flavored from tears neither of them had realized they were crying. And in that moment, Elena felt something shift. Not the naive belief that love conquered all, but the stronger conviction that choosing to fight together was its own kind of victory. The next morning, Elena walked into the board meeting with her head high and a plan. She'd spent half the night drafting it, refining it, preparing for every objection. Patricia Chen sat beside her, having reviewed everything and given her reluctant approval. Thank you for meeting on short notice, Elena began, her voice steady. I know you've asked me to choose between my position and my relationship with Mason Reed. I'm here to present a third option. Richard Thornton looked skeptical. Elena, we've been very clear, and I've heard you, but I'm not resigning, and I'm not ending my relationship. Instead, I'm proposing a comprehensive ethics framework that will govern not just my conduct, but the conduct of all executives in similar situations moving forward. She pulled up her presentation, walking them through the proposal. Mandatory disclosure of all relationships between employees at different levels. Recusal protocols for any decisions that could be perceived as conflicts of interest. Quarterly ethics audits. Third-party oversight for situations where bias might be a factor. And significantly, the establishment of clear professional boundaries that would move Mason's reporting structure further away from Elena's direct influence. Mason Reed will be transferred to a newly created role in our satellite office, Elena explained. He'll report directly to the Chief Operations Officer, with no interaction with me in his evaluation or compensation decisions. We'll maintain complete transparency about our relationship while ensuring zero possibility of favoritism. Margaret Chen spoke up. And you think this addresses the perception problem? Elena, people will still talk. They'll still assume you're showing preference. Probably, Elena agreed, but that's their problem, not ours. We can't control what people assume. We can only control our actions. And if our actions are beyond reproach, if we maintain the highest ethical standards, if we're more transparent than anyone else in this building, then eventually the facts will speak louder than the gossip. That's an awfully optimistic view, Thornton said dryly. Maybe. But consider the alternative. If you force me to choose between my personal life and my professional one, you're establishing a precedent that says leaders can't have relationships, that we're supposed to be these perfectly isolated figures who never connect with anyone in our professional orbit. That's not just unrealistic. It's cruel. And it's discriminatory, because you know as well as I do that male CEOs date employees all the time without facing this level of scrutiny. The room went silent. Elena had said the quiet part loud, and everyone knew it was true. Patricia Chen stepped in then, her voice professionally neutral. The proposed framework is actually more stringent than what most companies require. If the board approves it, Crestwell Dynamics would have one of the most robust ethics policies in the industry. That's not just good governance, it's good PR. The board debated for another hour. Elena sat through accusations and implications and thinly veiled suggestions that she was being unprofessional. She weathered it all with the same calm determination that had built her company, refusing to be shamed or intimidated. Finally, Thornton called for a vote. All in favor of implementing CEO Ward's ethics framework and allowing the relationship to continue under strict oversight? 5 hands went up, 3 stayed down. It was enough. Motion passes, Thornton said, though his expression suggested he still thought this was a terrible idea. But Elena, understand this. You're under a microscope now. One misstep, one hint of impropriety, and we'll revisit this decision. Are we clear? Crystal, Elena said, and meant it. She left that meeting feeling bruised but victorious. She'd fought for something that mattered and won, even if the victory came with strings attached. Now came the harder part, actually living under the scrutiny she'd agreed to. Mason took the news of his transfer with characteristic calm. Satellite office is actually closer to Ellie's school, better for pickups. You're not upset about being moved? Elena, I never wanted to work directly under you anyway. It was always going to be complicated. This way we have clear boundaries and I get a shorter commute. Sounds like a win to me. They were in the parking garage again, their safest place for private conversations, and Elena leaned against her car feeling the exhaustion of the past weeks finally catching up. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, she admitted. For something else to go wrong. Then stop waiting for it and just live, Mason suggested. We fought for this. We earned this. Let's actually try to enjoy it. Over the next 2 weeks, Elena discovered that Mason was right. Once they stopped bracing for disaster and started actually building a relationship, things became easier. Not easy. They still had to navigate complicated schedules and public scrutiny and the occasional nasty comment from someone who disapproved. But easier. They had their first official date at a restaurant downtown, where Elena was hyper-aware of potentially being photographed but tried to relax anyway. Mason told terrible jokes that made her laugh despite herself. They argued good-naturedly about whether artificial intelligence would eventually replace human workers, and Elena found herself genuinely enjoying the intellectual sparring. You're really smart, she said at one point, and immediately felt stupid for stating something so obvious. But Mason just smiled. So are you. It's one of the things I like best about you. I never have to dumb myself down or pretend to know less than I do. You match me. Elena felt warmth spread through her chest. She'd dated men before who were either intimidated by her intelligence or resentful of it. Mason was neither. He appreciated her mind the same way he appreciated everything else about her. Directly, honestly, without agenda. Their second date was at a science museum with Ellie, who dragged them through every dinosaur exhibit while providing running commentary on the accuracy of the displays. Elena found herself genuinely fascinated, not by the fossils themselves, but by watching Ellie's enthusiasm, Mason's patient engagement, the easy dynamic between father and daughter. She's teaching me, Elena said as they watched Ellie examine a triceratops skull. About what matters, about being present. She teaches me every day, Mason agreed. Usually things I didn't want to learn, like patience or humility or how little control I actually have over anything. Elena laughed. Sounds familiar. But the peace didn't last. It never did. The call came at 7 on a Wednesday evening. Elena was at Mason's apartment helping Ellie with a science project about ecosystems when Patricia Chen's name lit up her phone screen. We have a problem, Patricia said without preamble. Someone filed a formal complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Claims you've created a hostile work environment through your relationship with Mason Reed and subsequent preferential treatment. Elena felt ice slide through her veins. Who filed it? Anonymous, but the complaint is detailed, cites specific instances, includes testimony from multiple employees. Elena, this is serious. The EEOC will launch a formal investigation. which means interviews, document requests, the whole thing. And until it's resolved, it's going to be public knowledge that we're under federal investigation. But we followed every protocol. We implemented the ethics framework. Mason doesn't even report to me anymore. I know, but that doesn't matter to the person who filed this complaint. They want to damage your credibility, and they're using every tool available. Patricia paused. Elena, I need to ask, is there any possibility, any at all, that you've shown Mason favor in ways you haven't disclosed? No, absolutely not. Patricia, you've audited everything. You know I've been hyper careful. Then we fight it, but this is going to be ugly. EEOC investigations take months. The press will have a field day, and your relationship is going to be dissected in ways you can't imagine. After Elena hung up, she stood for a moment trying to process. Mason appeared in the doorway, his expression concerned. What happened? Elena explained about the complaint, watching his face grow progressively paler. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. This is never going to end, is it? He finally said. Someone is always going to be trying to tear us down. Probably, Elena admitted. The question is whether we keep fighting or whether we let them win. I'm so tired of fighting. Me too. They stood in the kitchen looking at each other, and Elena saw her own exhaustion mirrored in Mason's eyes. This was the reality they'd chosen: constant vigilance, endless justification, the draining work of defending their right to simply be together. Maybe we should end it, Elena heard herself say. Not us, but I could step down as CEO, transition to advisory role, remove the power dynamic entirely. And let whoever filed that complaint achieve exactly what they wanted? Mason shook his head. No, Elena, if you step down, they win. They prove that women in power can't have personal lives, that any relationship is ammunition, that being CEO means choosing between the job and everything else. But at what cost? Mason, this investigation is going to be invasive. They'll interview everyone, examine every interaction we've ever had. They'll talk to Ellie's school, your neighbors, anyone who might have information. Is that really what you want for your life? Before Mason could answer, Ellie appeared in the doorway. Are you guys breaking up? No, Mason said immediately. We're just talking about some complicated work stuff. It didn't sound like work stuff. It sounded like you're trying to protect each other by pushing each other away. Ellie crossed her arms. That's what happened in the movie we watched last week. The princess left because she thought the kingdom needed her to, but really she just needed to trust that people would help her fight the bad guys. Elena felt her throat tighten. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. Adults just don't listen. Ellie looked between them seriously. You can't give up. If you give up, then all the mean people win, and then they'll just be mean to the next person. Someone has to show them they're wrong. Out of the mouths of babes, Elena thought. An 8-year-old had just articulated what she'd been struggling to understand, that this wasn't just about her and Mason anymore. It was about setting a precedent, about proving that women in leadership could have complex personal lives and still be competent professionals. You're right, Elena said to Ellie. We're not giving up. We're going to fight this together. The EEOC investigation launched the following week. Elena had prepared herself for scrutiny, but the reality was still overwhelming. Investigators interviewed 43 current and former employees. They examined 2 years of emails, meeting notes, project assignments, performance reviews. They requested Elena's personal calendar, her phone records, documentation of every interaction she'd had with Mason since they'd started dating. The press covered it extensively. Some outlets were sympathetic, framing it as a witch hunt against a successful woman. Others implied she was getting what she deserved for mixing business with pleasure. The comments sections were predictably toxic. Elena endured it all with gritted teeth and Patricia Chen's steady support. She provided every document requested, answered every question honestly, maintained her composure even when investigators implied she was lying or hiding something. Mason went through his own interviews, equally invasive and draining. He came home from each one looking more exhausted, and Elena hated that he was suffering because of her. But the worst came 3 weeks into the investigation when the lead investigator called Elena in for what was supposed to be a routine follow-up. Instead, she found herself facing questions that made her blood run cold. Miss Ward, We've received information suggesting that your relationship with Mr. Reed began before his employment investigation concluded. Specifically, that you may have been romantically involved during the time you were investigating the corporate espionage allegations. Elena felt the floor drop out from under her. That's not true. We didn't become involved until after he was cleared. But you had feelings for him before then? You've admitted to months of growing attraction. Having feelings isn't the same as acting on them. I maintained complete professional boundaries during that investigation. I hired independent auditors specifically to avoid any appearance of bias. And yet you eventually entered into a relationship with the man you just publicly vindicated. You can see how that looks, Ms. Ward. It looks like two people who respected each other professionally eventually developed personal feelings, which is what happened. The investigator made notes without responding. Elena left that interview feeling sick. Someone had fed the EEOC a narrative designed to make her look corrupt, as if she'd cleared Mason not because of evidence, but because she wanted to date him. That night she called Mason in a panic. They think I vindicated you so we could be together. Someone told them we were involved during the investigation. But we weren't. I know that. You know that. But how do we prove it? It's just our word, and right now our word doesn't seem to count for much. Mason was quiet for a moment. Then, the Thai restaurant. Our first dinner. I paid with a credit card. That was after I was cleared, right? Yes, 2 days after. And before that, all our interactions were in the office or documented work meetings. Elena thought back. Yes, the coffee shop across from Ellie's school. I was there observing, but we didn't actually interact. Everything else was professional until after the investigation concluded. Then we get the credit card receipts. My calendar showing when I left work. Security footage from the office showing we never met privately during that time. We built a timeline that proves exactly when our relationship began. It was brilliant and obvious, and Elena felt hope flicker for the first time in days. They spent the next week reconstructing every interaction, every meeting, every moment they'd spent together. Patricia Chen helped, pulling security logs and email timestamps. They built an airtight timeline showing that while Elena and Mason had developed feelings over months, they hadn't acted on them until after his name was cleared. The evidence was damning in the best way. It showed Elena bending over backward to avoid any impropriety, maintaining strict boundaries even when it was difficult. It showed Mason's investigation being handled with complete objectivity, with Elena actually recusing herself from parts of it to avoid bias. When they presented the timeline to the EEOC, Elena watched the investigator's expression shift from skepticism to grudging acceptance. There was simply no way to spin the facts into the narrative someone had been pushing. 2 weeks later, the investigation concluded with a report that cleared Elena of all allegations. No preferential treatment, no abuse of power, no creation of hostile work environment. The relationship had begun appropriately, been conducted professionally, and created no actual conflicts of interest. Elena should have felt victorious. Instead, she felt empty. Because even though she'd been vindicated, she knew the accusations would follow her. People would remember the investigation, not the results. Her reputation had been permanently stained by innuendo and malice. It's not fair, she told Mason that evening. They were at her apartment, a rare occurrence since his place was more child-friendly. I did everything right, and I still get punished. I know, Mason said, pulling her close. But you also set a precedent. The next woman in your position will have this framework to point to. The next investigation will have to meet the standard you set. That matters, Elena. Does it? Because right now it feels like I sacrificed everything for a moral victory no one cares about. I care about it. Ellie cares about it. Patricia Chen definitely cares about it. She told me yesterday you're the most ethical CEO she's ever worked with. Mason tilted her chin up. And whether you feel it right now or not, you proved something important. That women can be complicated humans with personal lives and professional success. That you don't have to choose between being powerful and being loved. Elena wanted to believe him, wanted to feel the triumph of having fought and won, but mostly she just felt tired. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source 3 days later. Elena was in her office reviewing contracts when Marcus knocked urgently. "Boss, you need to see this." He handed her his tablet, which showed an internal company message board. Someone had posted anonymously. I know who filed the EEOC complaint and why. It was Jennifer Marsh from marketing. She did it because she's been trying to undermine Elena since the Riverside merger fell through. She blamed Elena for the lost commission even though it was Derek Shaw's sabotage that killed the deal. This was revenge, pure and simple. Elena's hand shook as she read. Jennifer. Sweet, crying at birthday parties Jennifer, who'd seemed so supportive, who'd warned Elena about gossip while probably being the source of half of it. Is this credible? Elena asked. It traced the post. It came from someone in Jennifer's department, and when I started asking around quietly, 3 people confirmed that Jennifer has been bitter about the Riverside situation for months. Apparently she was counting on that commission to pay off debt. Elena felt rage build in her chest, hot and righteous and completely justified. Jennifer had put her through months of hell, damaged her reputation, nearly destroyed her relationship, all because of a lost commission check. All because she couldn't accept that Derek Shaw's criminal actions, not Elena's decisions, had torpedoed the deal. Get Patricia Chen, Elena said quietly, and have security prevent Jennifer from leaving the building. The confrontation happened in Elena's office with Patricia Chen as witness. Jennifer tried to deny it at first, but when faced with the evidence, including IP logs showing she'd filed the anonymous EEOC complaint from her home computer, she cracked. You destroyed my career, Jennifer shouted. That Riverside commission was supposed to be mine. I worked on that proposal for 6 months, and you let Derek Shaw ruin everything. And then you turned around and started dating Mason Reed like none of it mattered. Like you could do whatever you wanted while the rest of us suffered the consequences of your bad management. My bad management? Elena's voice was ice. Derek Shaw was embezzling funds. He committed fraud. He framed Mason Reed. Those were his actions, not mine. And the fact that you've spent months trying to punish me for his crime says everything about your character and nothing about my leadership. Everyone thinks you're sleeping your way to happiness while we all struggle, Jennifer spat. Someone needed to hold you accountable. By filing false allegations? By lying to federal investigators? Jennifer, you didn't hold me accountable. You committed a crime, and now you're going to face the consequences. The police arrived 20 minutes later. Jennifer was arrested for filing a false complaint, obstruction of justice, and defamation. As security escorted her out, she was still shouting about fairness and accountability, completely unable to see the irony. Elena watched from her office window as Jennifer was loaded into the police car and felt something inside her finally settle. It wasn't triumph. She was too exhausted for that. But it was closure, an ending to the nightmare that had consumed the past 2 months. That evening, Elena called a company-wide meeting. Everyone gathered in the main conference hall, buzzing with speculation. Elena stood at the front and told them everything: the false allegations, Jennifer's arrest, the complete vindication from the EEOC investigation. I know many of you have been concerned about my relationship with Mason Reed, Elena said, her voice carrying across the silent room. You've worried about favoritism, about my judgment, about the company's reputation. I understand those concerns, but I want to be absolutely clear. I have done nothing wrong. Neither has Mason. We fell in love, we followed every protocol, and we maintained complete professional integrity throughout. And anyone who suggests otherwise is either misinformed or deliberately malicious. She paused, letting that sink in. Going forward, I expect this company to be a place where people can have complex, messy, human lives and still be respected professionals. Where women in leadership aren't held to impossible standards of perfection. Where relationships between consenting adults are treated as private matters, unless they create actual, not perceived, conflicts of interest. If you can't work in that environment, I invite you to find employment elsewhere. The room was dead silent. Then someone in the back started clapping, Marcus. Then Patricia Chen joined in, then more people, until the entire company was applauding, and Elena felt tears prick her eyes. After the meeting, Mason found her in her office. He didn't say anything, just pulled her into a hug that lasted long enough for Elena to remember how to breathe. It's over, she whispered into his shoulder. It's finally over. Not over, Mason corrected gently. Just beginning, the actual beginning, where we get to just be together without constantly defending ourselves. Elena pulled back to look at him. Think we can handle boring domesticity after all this drama? Mason smiled. Only one way to find out. They tried. For 3 weeks after Jennifer's arrest, Elena and Mason attempted to build something resembling a normal relationship. Dinner dates where they actually relaxed, weekends at the park with Ellie, quiet evenings at Mason's apartment watching movies while Ellie did homework at the kitchen table. It should have been easy, should have felt like the reward they'd earned after months of fighting. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she was waiting for the next disaster. Every time her phone buzzed, she tensed. Every board meeting felt like potential ambush. She'd started sleeping poorly, waking at 3 a.m. with her mind racing through worst-case scenarios that grew more elaborate and unlikely with each passing night. "You're not present," Mason said one evening. They were cooking together in his kitchen, or rather, Mason was cooking while Elena stood at the counter pretending to chop vegetables, but mostly staring into space. "Where'd you go?" "I'm here," Elena protested automatically. "Physically, sure. Mentally, you've been somewhere else for days." Mason turned off the stove and faced her. "Talk to me. What's going on?" Elena set down the knife, her hands trembling slightly. "I keep thinking it's not over, that there's someone else waiting to file a complaint or leak something to the press or find some new way to make us pay for being together. I can't stop bracing for impact." "So we're living in anticipation of disaster that might never come?" "Every disaster we've faced so far came from somewhere I didn't expect," Elena said, her voice rising. "Derek Shaw framing you. Jennifer filing false allegations. Who's next, Mason? Which person at that company is going to decide they're entitled to destroy us because they don't like that we're together?" "Maybe no one. Maybe we actually get to just live now. You don't believe that any more than I do." Mason was quiet for a moment, and Elena knew she'd hit a nerve. Because he was tired too. Tired of defending their relationship, tired of being scrutinized, tired of living under constant pressure. She could see it in the lines around his eyes, the tension he carried in his shoulders, even during supposedly relaxing moments. "What do you want me to say?" Mason asked finally. "That it's been easy? It hasn't. That I don't sometimes wonder if we made a mistake? I do. But Elena, the alternative is giving up, and I'm not ready to do that. Are you?" Before Elena could answer, Ellie burst through the front door with Mason's mother, who'd picked her up from an after-school program. The little girl was talking a mile a minute about some classroom drama involving stolen erasers and questionable alliances, and the moment for honest conversation passed. Later that night, after Ellie was in bed and Mason's mother had left, Elena found herself standing in Mason's small bathroom staring at her reflection. She looked exhausted. Not just tired from long work hours, but fundamentally worn down in a way that sleep couldn't fix. The past 6 months had aged her. Her phone buzzed. A text from Patricia Chen. "Board meeting moved to tomorrow morning. Thornton's request. Agenda TBD." Elena's stomach dropped. Unscheduled board meetings never meant good news. She walked back to the living room where Mason was cleaning up dinner dishes. "I have to go," she said. "Emergency board meeting tomorrow morning." Mason's hands stilled in the soapy water. "What now?" "I don't know, but Thornton called it, which means it's not going to be friendly." Elena grabbed her purse, suddenly desperate to leave, to have space to think. "I should go home. Prepare." "Elena, it's 9 p.m. What are you going to prepare for when you don't even know what the meeting is about?" "I don't know, okay? I just need to be alone right now." She saw hurt flash across Mason's face, but he didn't argue, just dried his hands and walked her to the door. "Call me after? Let me know you're okay?" "Of course." Elena kissed him quickly, perfunctorily, and left before he could see the tears threatening to spill. She drove home in silence, her mind spinning. Something was coming. She could feel it. Another attack, another crisis, another test of whether this relationship could survive in the hostile environment they'd created. And she was so tired of fighting. The board meeting the next morning confirmed her worst fears. Richard Thornton waited until everyone was seated before dropping his bomb. "The Riverside competitor that received our leaked merger proposal is threatening to sue for tortious interference," he announced. They claimed that Derek Shaw's actions, while criminal, were enabled by lax oversight from executive leadership, specifically from you, Elena. Elena felt her blood pressure spike. That's absurd. Derek Shaw operated outside established protocols. I had no knowledge of his activities until you launched an investigation to clear your boyfriend, Thornton interrupted. That's how they're framing it. That you were so distracted by your personal life that you failed to notice criminal activity happening under your nose. And now they're demanding a settlement of $15 million or they'll take it to court. Let them take it to court, Elena said coldly. We did nothing wrong. Derek Shaw was a criminal who hid his activities carefully. No reasonable person could have detected what he was doing without the forensic investigation we eventually conducted. Are you sure about that? This was Margaret Chen. Because our insurance company disagrees. They're saying that your relationship with Mason Reed created enough distraction that it constitutes negligence. They're threatening to deny coverage for any settlement. Elena felt the room tilt. Without insurance coverage, a $15 million settlement would devastate the company. And if they fought the case in court, the legal fees alone could run into millions. Either way, Crestwell Dynamics, the company she'd built from nothing, was facing potential financial ruin. This is ridiculous, Elena said, but her voice lacked conviction. They're using my personal life as a weapon to extract money from us. Yes, Thornton agreed, and it's working. Because you gave them that weapon when you decided your relationship was more important than maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. I maintained every boundary. I followed every protocol. I did nothing wrong. And yet here we are, facing a lawsuit that directly references your compromised judgment. Thornton leaned forward. Elena, I'm not enjoying this, but the board has discussed it, and we're in agreement. The only way forward is for you to step down as CEO. Transition to an advisory role, minimize the perception of impropriety, give us grounds to argue that we've taken corrective action. You want me to resign because someone is using my personal life to extort the company? We want you to put the company's interests first, which is what you failed to do for the past 6 months. Elena looked around the table, seeing varying degrees of sympathy and resignation on the other board members' faces. They'd already decided. This meeting wasn't a discussion. It was a notification. I need time to consider, Elena said, her voice barely steady. You have until Monday, Thornton replied. Resign voluntarily or we'll call for a vote of no confidence. Either way, you're done as CEO. Elena made it back to her office before the tears came. She'd known this was a possibility from the moment she'd chosen to fight for her relationship with Mason. But knowing something intellectually and facing the actual reality of losing everything she'd built were two entirely different experiences. Patricia Chen found her 20 minutes later, sitting at her desk, staring at nothing. I heard. I'm sorry, Elena. Sorry doesn't change anything. No, but for what it's worth, I think they're wrong. You were an exemplary CEO who happened to fall in love. That shouldn't be a firing offense. Apparently it is. Elena wiped her eyes roughly. 7 years. 7 years of 80-hour weeks and sacrificing everything for this company. And it ends because some competitor figured out they could weaponize my personal life. It ends because the board lacks courage, Patricia corrected. They'd rather sacrifice you than fight a lawsuit. That's on them, not you. After Patricia left, Elena sat alone in her office for a long time. The walls were covered with awards, photos from company milestones, framed articles about Crestwell Dynamics' success. Her entire adult life was documented in this room, and now she was supposed to just walk away from it. Her phone buzzed. Mason. How did it go? Elena stared at the message for a full minute before responding. Can you come to my office? I need to see you. Mason arrived 30 minutes later, his expression worried. Elena closed the door and told him everything, the lawsuit, the board's ultimatum, the timeline for her resignation. They're forcing you out, Mason said, his voice tight with anger. Because of me. Because we're together. Because they're cowards who won't fight, Elena corrected. But even as she said it, she knew the distinction didn't matter. The result was the same. Then I'll resign too, Mason said immediately. Remove myself from the equation. Maybe that changes their calculus. It won't. The damage is done. The lawsuit specifically mentions our relationship as evidence of negligence. You leaving now doesn't erase that. Mason started pacing, his movements jerky with frustration. This is insane. We followed every rule. We did everything right. How are we still being punished? Because the world isn't fair, Elena said, and heard the bitterness in her own voice. Because people can weaponize anything if they're creative enough. Because being a woman in leadership means playing by different rules that change whenever someone decides your existence is inconvenient. So what do we do? Elena looked at him. This man she'd fought so hard to be with, who'd cost her everything and was somehow still worth it, and felt something inside her crack. I don't know. I honestly don't know anymore. That weekend was supposed to be special. Mason had planned a day trip to a nearby state park, just the three of them. A chance to escape the pressure and remember why they were fighting so hard to stay together. But Elena couldn't shake the dark cloud hanging over everything. Ellie noticed immediately. She was picking wildflowers along the trail, chattering about their different species and optimal growing conditions, when she suddenly stopped and looked at Elena seriously. You're sad again. Did more bad people do something? Elena tried to smile. Just work stuff, sweetheart. Is it because of Daddy? Because you love him and people think that's wrong? Mason stepped in. Ellie, that's complicated. Everyone always says that, Ellie interrupted, her 8-year-old frustration boiling over. But it's not complicated. You like each other. You make each other happy. That should be enough. Why isn't that enough? Out of the mouths of babes, Elena thought again. Why wasn't it enough? Why did love have to be justified and defended and fought for with every weapon at their disposal? Why couldn't two people just choose each other and have that be respected? Because sometimes the world has rules that don't make sense, Elena said carefully. And when you break those rules, even for good reasons, there are consequences. Then the rules are stupid, and someone should change them. I agree, Elena said, but changing rules is hard, and sometimes the cost is higher than we can afford to pay. Ellie studied her with those perceptive gray eyes. Are you going to leave us? Because of the stupid rules? The question hit Elena like a physical blow. She looked at Mason, saw her own panic reflected in his expression. I'm not leaving you, Ellie. I promise. But you're leaving the job. That's why you're sad. It wasn't a question. Somehow this brilliant, intuitive child had put together all the pieces that the adults were trying to hide. Maybe, Elena admitted, because lying to Ellie felt worse than the truth. Some people at my work think it would be better if I wasn't in charge anymore, because of the mistakes other people made that they're blaming on me. That's not fair. No, it's not. So fight them, like you fought before. Ellie said it with such certainty, such faith that fighting was always the answer. I'm tired of fighting, sweetheart. But you can't give up, because then they win, and then they'll do it to someone else. You taught me that. Ellie crossed her arms. You said when bullies win, they keep bullying, so you have to stop them. Elena felt tears sting her eyes. She'd said that to Ellie weeks ago, trying to explain why she was fighting so hard to clear Mason's name. And now her own words were being thrown back at her by a child who understood integrity better than most adults. What if I don't know how to fight anymore? Elena asked quietly. Then Daddy and I will help you remember, Ellie said simply. She took Elena's hand with complete trust, and something inside Elena's chest cracked wide open. That evening, after they'd returned from the park and put Ellie to bed, Elena and Mason finally had the conversation they'd been avoiding. I don't want to resign, Elena said. They were sitting on Mason's couch in the dark, too exhausted to even turn on lights. But I don't see another option. If I fight this, the legal battle could destroy the company. All those people who depend on Crestwell for their livelihoods would suffer. How can I prioritize my pride over their financial security? Is it pride? Mason asked. Or is it principle? Because from where I'm sitting, this isn't about you being stubborn. It's about whether powerful women are allowed to have personal lives without being destroyed for it. Pretty words. Doesn't change the practical reality. Then change the practical reality, Mason said. You're the smartest person I know, Elena. If anyone can find a way out of this, it's you. I've been thinking about it constantly. I don't see a way. Mason was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, What if you didn't resign? What if you fought the lawsuit and won? The board doesn't want to fight. They want to settle and move on. The board wants you to resign so they can claim they took corrective action. But what if there's a third option? What if you step down temporarily, I leave the company entirely, and you fight the lawsuit from outside. Prove that the allegations are baseless, that your relationship had nothing to do with Derek Shaw's crimes, and once you win, you negotiate your way back in. Elena turned to look at him. You'd quit? Leave your job? I'd do it for the right reasons. Not because I'm being forced out, but because it's the strategic move that protects what we've built. Mason took her hand. Elena, I don't care about my job at Crestwell. I care about you. And I care about proving that loving each other doesn't make us incompetent or negligent or any of the other things they're accusing us of being. That's a huge risk. If we lose the lawsuit, neither of us has a job. If you resign now, you definitely don't have a job. At least this way, we're fighting on our terms. Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not quite hope, but maybe the possibility of hope. A plan that felt less like surrender and more like strategy. I'd need a good lawyer, someone who specializes in corporate litigation and isn't afraid to get aggressive. I might know someone, Mason said. Sarah, my late wife. Her brother is a corporate attorney. Brilliant, ruthless when he needs to be. He owes me a favor. Over the next 3 days, Elena and Mason built their case. They met with Mason's brother-in-law, Daniel, a shark of a lawyer who listened to their story with growing outrage. This is textbook extortion, Daniel said after reviewing the lawsuit. They're using your relationship as leverage because they think you'll fold rather than risk public scrutiny. But the actual legal basis is garbage. Derek Shaw was operating independently, hiding his activities, and was caught through an investigation you initiated. There's no negligence here. Can we win? Elena asked. In court? Absolutely. But it'll be ugly. They'll drag your relationship through depositions, question every decision you made, imply impropriety at every turn. You need to be prepared for that level of invasion. Elena looked at Mason, who nodded. We're prepared. We've been living with invasion for months. At least this time we're fighting back. On Monday morning, Elena walked into the board meeting with her head high and Daniel beside her. Richard Thornton looked surprised to see the attorney. Elena, we agreed you had until today to submit your resignation. I'm not resigning, Elena said calmly. Instead, I'm temporarily stepping back as CEO while I fight this lawsuit personally. Patricia Chen will serve as interim CEO. Mason Reed has voluntarily resigned from the company to remove any appearance of conflict, and I'm here to inform you that we will be countersuing the Riverside competitor for malicious prosecution and defamation. The room erupted. Thornton was shouting about insurance liability. Margaret Chen was trying to talk over him. Other board members were demanding clarification. Elena let the chaos swirl around her and felt, for the first time in weeks, completely certain of her path. Daniel held up a hand. The lawsuit against Ms. Ward is baseless and motivated by revenge for the Riverside deal falling through. We have documentation proving Derek Shaw acted independently and that Ms. Ward's oversight was appropriate given the sophisticated nature of his fraud. Furthermore, the plaintiff's specific focus on Ms. Ward's personal relationship as evidence of negligence constitutes defamation per se, a false statement that damages her professional reputation. You can't countersue, Thornton sputtered. The cost, the publicity. I can and I will, Elena said, with or without the board's support, but I'd prefer to fight this with Crestwell's backing because winning will protect not just me, but every employee who's ever been in a relationship with someone in their professional sphere. This matters, Richard, and I'm not walking away. The vote was close, 5-4 in favor of supporting Elena's legal strategy. But it was enough. They had official backing, insurance coverage, and the moral high ground. Now they just had to prove it in court. The next 3 months were brutal. Depositions that lasted entire days. Document discovery that required Elena to turn over years of emails and records. Cross-examinations designed to rattle her and make her admit to impropriety that didn't exist. Mason was deposed twice, grilled about their relationship timeline, his work performance, whether Elena had ever shown him favoritism. He remained calm and factual throughout, refusing to be baited into emotional responses. The worst moment came when the opposing counsel tried to use Ellie as evidence of Elena's distraction. Isn't it true, Mr. Reed, that your daughter had multiple doctor's appointments during the time period in question, and that Ms. Ward accompanied you to several of these appointments? That's not true, Mason said evenly. Elena has met my daughter socially, but she's never attended a medical appointment. But you've missed work for these appointments. Yes, as is my right under company policy and federal family leave law, and I made up that time by working early mornings and late evenings. While your girlfriend was CEO, reviewing your work? While the woman I love was doing her job ethically and professionally, yes. Daniel objected before opposing counsel could pursue that line further, but the damage was done. The press coverage was exactly as ugly as predicted, with headlines about CEO's secret romance and corporate love triangle costs millions. Elena endured it all by focusing on what mattered, the evidence, the forensic report showing Derek Shaw's fraud, the independent audit proving her investigation was thorough and unbiased, the testimony from Patricia Chen and other executives confirming that Elena's decision-making had remained sound throughout, the timeline proving she and Mason hadn't acted on their feelings until after all professional complications were resolved. The turning point came during Elena's second deposition, when opposing counsel made a critical mistake. Ms. Ward, isn't it true that you developed romantic feelings for Mr. Reed specifically because you were working closely with him during a high-stress investigation? No, Elena said calmly. I developed feelings for Mason Reed because he's intelligent, kind, principled, and an excellent father. The investigation was already complete when our relationship began. And frankly, your question reveals the sexist assumption underlying this entire lawsuit, that a woman in leadership can't make sound professional judgments if she also has personal feelings. Would you ask a male CEO the same question? Ms. Ward, because male executives date employees all the time without facing this level of scrutiny. They marry their secretaries, have affairs with junior staff, show blatant favoritism, and it's treated as personal business. But I follow every protocol, maintain perfect boundaries, and conduct an independent investigation to avoid even the appearance of bias. And somehow, that's still not enough. So no, counselor, I don't accept the premise of your question. Daniel later told her that moment won them the case. The deposition video would be played in court, and it perfectly captured the double standard at the heart of the lawsuit. The jury would see a competent woman being attacked for simply being human. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Elena sat through every session, maintaining her composure even when testimony got personal or cruel. Mason sat in the gallery when he wasn't needed on the stand, a quiet presence that reminded Elena why she was fighting. Ellie asked about it constantly. Did you win today? Are the bad people going away? And Elena had to explain that court wasn't like her playground disputes. There was no clear victor each day, just a slow accumulation of evidence and argument. But in the end, the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with a verdict. No negligence, no liability, lawsuit dismissed with prejudice. And in a stunning turn, they awarded Elena damages for the defamation claim. Not the millions she'd asked for, but enough to make a point. Elena didn't celebrate. She walked out of that courthouse feeling hollowed out and exhausted. She'd won, but the cost had been enormous. 3 months of her life consumed by legal battles. Her reputation dragged through mud. Her relationship with Mason tested in ways that would leave permanent scars. That evening, she met Mason at their favorite Thai restaurant, the same place where they'd had their first real conversation months ago. It felt like decades had passed since then. "We won," Mason said, raising his water glass, "against everyone who said we couldn't, against every obstacle they threw at us." "We survived," Elena corrected. "I'm not sure that's the same as winning." "Isn't it? We're still together. You're vindicated. The truth came out. What more do we need?" "I need to figure out who I am without Crestwell dynamics defining me," Elena said quietly. "I stepped down as CEO. Even though I won, I can't go back to that role. Not after everything that's happened. The board doesn't trust me. Half the company thinks I'm either corrupt or naive, and I'm so tired of fighting that I don't even want to fight anymore." Mason reached across the table for her hand. "So what do you want?" Elena looked at him, really looked at him, this man who'd stood beside her through everything, who'd sacrificed his own job to protect her strategy, who'd never once suggested that their relationship wasn't worth the cost. And she realized she knew exactly what she wanted. "I want you to marry me," Elena said. "Not as a joke this time, not as a hypothetical. For real, Mason Reed. Will you marry me?" Mason's eyes widened. For a moment, he just stared at her, processing. Then a slow smile spread across his face, the kind of smile that transformed his entire being, erasing the weariness and worry and revealing pure joy underneath. "What if I say yes?" he asked, echoing that first moment in the conference room. "Then I say we stop letting other people define what our life should look like," Elena replied. "We build something new together. Not a company, not a career, a family. Me, you, Ellie. We figure out what happiness looks like when we're not constantly under siege." "That sounds terrifying," Mason said. "I know. And uncertain. I know. And absolutely perfect." Mason stood, pulled Elena to her feet, and kissed her in the middle of the restaurant while other diners stared. When they finally broke apart, he said, "Yes, my answer is yes." They told Ellie the next morning over pancakes at Mason's apartment. Elena had stayed the night, not for the first time, but it felt different now with a proposal hanging between them, making everything more real and weighted with possibility. Ellie was drowning her pancakes in syrup with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been told moderation was optional when Mason cleared his throat. "Hey, sweetheart, Elena and I have something to tell you." Ellie looked up, syrup dripping from her fork. "Are you getting married?" Mason and Elena exchanged startled glances. "How did you—" "You're happy, like really happy. Not the kind of happy you pretend to be when you're actually stressed. Real happy." Ellie set down her fork seriously. "And Elena has been here for 3 nights in a row, which usually means something important is happening. Plus, I heard you guys talking last night about building a family, and that sounded like marriage talk." "You're too smart for your own good," Elena said, feeling a mixture of amusement and affection. "But yes, I asked your dad to marry me, and he said yes." Ellie processed this for approximately 3 seconds before launching herself out of her chair and tackling Elena in a hug that nearly knocked her off the couch. "I knew it! I knew you'd stay. Sarah's mom said you probably would leave because relationships under pressure never work out, but I knew she was wrong." "Sarah's mom talks too much," Mason muttered. "So does that mean you'll be my stepmom?" Ellie asked, pulling back to study Elena's face. "Like officially?" Elena felt her throat tighten. She'd spent the past few months so focused on fighting for her relationship with Mason that she hadn't fully processed what it meant to become Ellie's stepmother, to take on responsibility for this brilliant, perceptive child who'd already lost one mother. The weight of it was suddenly overwhelming. "If that's okay with you," Elena said carefully, "I know I can't replace your mom. I wouldn't want to try, but I'd like to be someone you can count on, someone who's here for you." Ellie considered this with the seriousness of someone weighing a major life decision. "Can I still call you Elena instead of Mom?" "Of course. Whatever makes you comfortable." "And will you help me with my science projects? Because Daddy tries, but he's not very good at the technical stuff." "I will absolutely help with science projects." "And can we get a dog? Because Daddy always says no, but maybe you'll say yes?" Mason laughed. "Nice try, but Elena and I are a united front on the no-dog decision." "We'll revisit it in a year," Elena amended, earning a grateful look from Ellie and a betrayed one from Mason. Over the next 2 weeks, Elena and Mason worked on building their new life together. Elena's victory in the lawsuit had vindicated her professionally, but she'd been serious about not returning to Crestwell Dynamics as CEO. Patricia Chen was doing an excellent job as interim leader, and the board, while grudgingly admitting Elena had been right to fight, still carried too much baggage about her relationship with Mason. So Elena made a different choice. She'd been contacted by 3 different companies offering consulting positions, and 2 venture capital firms interested in her joining as a partner. But instead of jumping into another high-pressure role, she decided to take time. 6 months, maybe a year, to figure out what she actually wanted rather than what she thought she should want. "I've spent my entire adult life building other people's dreams or companies that would validate my worth," Elena told Mason one evening. They were at her apartment. She was slowly packing things, preparing to move in with Mason and Ellie rather than maintain 2 separate spaces. "I want to figure out what my dream actually looks like." "That's terrifying," Mason observed. He was wrapping her stemware in newspaper, moving with the careful precision he brought to everything. "Completely. I've never not had a plan. never not known exactly what the next 5 years looked like. Elena taped up a box and labeled it Kitchen Fragile in her neat handwriting. But that certainty came at a cost. I missed relationships, experiences, entire chunks of being human because I was too focused on achievement. So what does the uncertain version of Elena Ward want to do with her time? Elena sat back on her heels, thinking. I want to have breakfast with you and Ellie without checking my phone every 30 seconds. I want to help Ellie with her science fair project without it being squeezed between conference calls. I want to figure out if I actually like hiking, or if I just thought I should like it because successful people hike. She paused. And I want to write a book. Mason looked up, surprised. A book about what? About what happened to us? The lawsuits, the investigation, the cost of being a woman in leadership who dared to have a personal life. Not as some bitter manifesto, but as a case study. Here's what we did right, here's what we did wrong, here's how companies can actually support executives having human relationships without everything falling apart. That would be controversial. Good. I'm tired of playing it safe, Elena smiled. Plus, someone needs to document this mess for the next woman who finds herself in an impossible situation. Maybe it'll help her fight smarter than we did. The engagement itself was quiet and private, the way they'd both learned to prefer things. No announcement on social media, no press release, just telling the people who mattered. Mason's mother cried happy tears and immediately started planning a wedding that Elena gently suggested might be too elaborate. Patricia Chen sent champagne with a note that said, "About damn time." Even a few former colleagues from Crestwell reached out with congratulations, though Elena noticed the absence of responses from certain board members. The wedding planning process revealed unexpected challenges. Mason wanted something small and intimate, immediate family only. Elena had no family to speak of, her parents having died years ago and no siblings to fill the gaps. It should have simplified things, but instead it highlighted how isolated she'd become while building her career. We could do it at the courthouse, Mason suggested one evening. They were looking at venue options that all felt too big or too formal. Just us, Ellie, my mom, and maybe a friend or two as witnesses. Keep it simple. Elena wanted to agree. Simple sounded perfect after months of complexity, but something held her back. What about the people at Crestwell, the ones who supported us through everything? Patricia Chen, Marcus, even some of the junior staff who sent emails saying we inspired them. Don't they deserve to be there? You want to invite your former company to our wedding? I want to show them that we won, that love survived all their scrutiny and judgment, that we built something real despite every obstacle they put in our way. Elena looked at Mason seriously. Unless you think that's petty? I think it's human and brave, and probably going to result in a much bigger wedding than either of us wanted. They compromised on a middle ground. A ceremony at the Botanical Gardens, beautiful but not ostentatious, with about 60 guests, mostly colleagues who'd supported them, a few of Mason's family members, some of Ellie's friends' parents who'd been kind during the difficult months. Not a massive celebration, but not hidden either. A statement that they had nothing to apologize for. The real complication came 2 months before the planned wedding date, when Richard Thornton requested a meeting with Elena. She almost declined. What could he possibly have to say that she wanted to hear? But curiosity won out, and she agreed to meet him for coffee at a neutral location. Thornton looked older than she remembered, the stress of the past year having carved new lines into his face. He ordered coffee with shaking hands and didn't meet her eyes for the first few minutes. I owe you an apology, he finally said, for the board's treatment during the investigation, for pushing you to resign, for not having the courage to stand by you when you needed support. Elena hadn't expected this. What prompted this sudden conscience? My daughter, Thornton said quietly. She's 28, brilliant, just made partner at her law firm. Last month she told me she's dating one of the associates. Nothing inappropriate, different practice areas, no direct reporting relationship. But her managing partner called her in and suggested she end it, said it was complicated and might affect her trajectory. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. Let me guess. He wouldn't have said the same to a male partner. Exactly. And when she came to me upset, asking if she should sacrifice her relationship for her career, I realized I'd told you to do exactly that. I'd been that managing partner prioritizing optics over ethics, making you choose because it was easier than doing the hard work of actually supporting you. Thornton finally met her eyes. I was wrong, Elena, and I'm sorry. Elena didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to throw Thornton's apology back in his face, to tell him it was too little too late. But another part, the part that had been fighting exhaustion for months, was just tired of carrying anger. What did you tell your daughter? Elena asked. I told her to fight, to document everything, follow every protocol, and refuse to apologize for being human. I told her about you and what you'd gone through, and that if she had half your courage, she'd be fine. Thornton's expression was pained. She asked if I'd supported you. I had to tell her the truth. Which was? That I'd been a coward, and that I'd lost one of the best CEOs I'd ever worked with because I valued appearance over substance. Elena sipped her coffee, processing. Your apology doesn't change what happened, doesn't erase the damage or give me back the months of hell I went through. I know, but I wanted you to hear it anyway, and I wanted to ask, would you consider coming back to Crestwell? Not as CEO necessarily, but in some advisory capacity. We need your voice, Elena. We need someone who'll push back when we're being cowards. I'm getting married in 2 months and writing a book about corporate ethics failures. I don't have time to save Crestwell from its own mediocrity. Thornton actually smiled at that. Fair enough, but the offer stands. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, we'd be fortunate to have you back in any capacity. After he left, Elena sat for a long time thinking about redemption and forgiveness and whether people could actually change. She didn't know if Thornton's apology was genuine or just guilt over his daughter's situation, but maybe it didn't matter. Maybe the point was that he'd recognized his mistake and was trying to do better. She told Mason about it that evening while they were cooking dinner together, a routine they'd fallen into, this domestic dance of chopping vegetables and stirring sauce while Ellie did homework at the table. Do you want to go back? Mason asked carefully. To Crestwell, I mean. I'd understand if you did. No, that chapter's closed. Elena tasted the sauce, added more garlic. But it made me think about what comes next. After the wedding, after the book. What do I actually want to build? You don't have to have all the answers right now. I know, but I'm used to having answers. Being certain. Elena turned to face him. What if I'm terrible at being uncertain? What if I can't handle not having a 5-year plan? Mason kissed her forehead. Then we'll figure it out together. That's what partnership means, right? Being uncertain together and trusting we'll find our way. The weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of planning and last-minute decisions. Ellie insisted on being involved in every detail, from choosing the flowers, purple, obviously, to selecting the music for the ceremony. She took her role as junior wedding coordinator extremely seriously, keeping detailed lists and reminding Elena and Mason of deadlines they'd forgotten. Someone has to be organized, Ellie declared when Mason teased her about the 3-ring binder she'd created for wedding planning. You two are too busy being in love to remember important things like whether we need 75 or 80 chairs. 3 days before the wedding, Elena had a final meeting with Patricia Chen to officially transfer her remaining responsibilities at Crestwell. Patricia had been running the company beautifully as interim CEO, and the board had just voted to make her position permanent. I have something for you, Patricia said, sliding an envelope across the desk. From the junior staff, they took up a collection. Elena opened it to find a card signed by nearly 40 employees, most of whom she'd barely interacted with during her time as CEO. The messages were simple but heartfelt. Thank you for showing us we don't have to choose. You fought for what mattered and won. Your courage changed this company. They wanted you to know that what you went through mattered, Patricia said quietly. We've updated the ethics policies, created better protections for employee relationships, established clear protocols so no one else has to go through what you did. You changed this place, Elena, even if you're not here to see it. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. I just wanted to be with someone I loved without losing everything else. And you proved it was possible. That's not a small thing. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, unseasonably warm for October. Elena woke up in her apartment, now mostly empty, just a few pieces of furniture waiting for the moving company, and felt a strange calm settle over her. No nerves, no second guessing, just certainty that she was making exactly the right choice. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mason. Ellie wants to know if you're having second thoughts because you haven't texted in 3 hours, and that's statistically unusual behavior. Elena smiled and typed back, "Tell our daughter I was sleeping like a normal person and I'm exactly where I want to be." "Our daughter," Mason responded with a heart emoji. "I like the sound of that." The ceremony itself was simple and perfect. Elena wore a cream dress that wasn't quite white, wasn't quite ivory, but felt exactly right. Mason wore a suit that actually fit properly for once, and Ellie wore a purple dress she'd picked out herself that matched the flowers. As Elena walked down the makeshift aisle between rows of chairs in the botanical garden, she saw faces she recognized. Patricia Chen dabbing her eyes with a tissue, Marcus grinning like an idiot, some of the junior staff who'd sent the card. Even a few board members who'd eventually come around to supporting her, though notably not Richard Thornton. He'd sent a gift with his apologies, but understood his presence might be uncomfortable. But mostly, Elena saw Mason standing at the end of the aisle with Ellie beside him, both of them looking at her with expressions of absolute joy and certainty. This was her family. This was what she'd fought for. This strange, complicated, beautiful thing they'd built together out of birthday jokes and corporate scandals and refusing to give up. The officiant kept the ceremony brief and personal. When it came time for vows, Elena had planned something eloquent and meaningful. Instead, she looked at Mason and said simply, "You asked me once, what if you said yes? I'm so grateful you did. I'm grateful for every fight, every obstacle, every impossible choice that led us here. You and Ellie are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I promise to spend the rest of my life earning that gift." Mason's vows were equally simple. "When you joked about marrying me in that conference room, I thought you were just being Elena, bold and funny and a little reckless. I never imagined you'd actually mean it. But I'm so glad you did. You taught me that it's possible to be vulnerable and strong at the same time, to fight for love without apologizing for it. I promise to stand beside you for whatever comes next, certain or uncertain, planned or completely unexpected." When the officiant pronounced them married, the crowd erupted in applause. Ellie cheered louder than anyone, jumping up and down with pure 8-year-old enthusiasm. Elena and Mason kissed, and it felt both familiar and brand new, the culmination of everything they'd survived and the beginning of everything they'd build. The reception was held in a nearby event space, casual and warm rather than formal. People gave toasts that were funny and touching by turns. Patricia Chen spoke about Elena's integrity and courage. Mason's mother welcomed Elena to the family with tears streaming down her face. Even Marcus got up and told an embarrassing story about the birthday party where it all started, making everyone laugh at how oblivious they'd all been. But the best moment came near the end of the evening. Elena was talking with a group of former colleagues when she felt a tug on her dress. Ellie stood there holding a folded piece of paper. "I wrote something," Ellie said. "For you. Is it okay if I read it?" "Of course, sweetheart." Ellie climbed onto a chair so everyone could see her, unfolded her paper with careful 8-year-old solemnity, and began to read. "When my mom died, I thought our family was broken forever, just me and Daddy trying to figure out how to be okay. But then Elena came, and she didn't fix everything because you can't fix sad. But she made new things, new happy things that don't replace the old happy, but live next to it. She fought really hard to be with us even when people were mean. She showed me that love is brave and sometimes you have to be stubborn to keep good things. So thank you, Elena, for being stubborn, and for making Daddy smile again, and for helping with my science projects even though you're really busy. You're the best stepmom I didn't know I wanted." By the time Ellie finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Elena was openly crying, not caring about her makeup or maintaining composure. She pulled Ellie into a hug and whispered, "Thank you for letting me into your family. It's the greatest honor of my life." Later, as the reception wound down and guests began to leave, Elena and Mason stood on the terrace overlooking the garden where they'd just gotten married. Ellie had fallen asleep in a chair inside, worn out from excitement and too much cake. "We did it," Mason said, pulling Elena close. "We actually did it, survived everything and ended up here." "Was it worth it?" Elena asked. "All the fighting and scrutiny and impossible choices?" Mason looked at her like she'd asked if breathing was worth it. "Elena, you're the love of my life. Ellie adores you. We have a future together that's ours to define however we want. Of course it was worth it. Even the parts where we nearly lost everything? Especially those parts, because they proved we're strong enough to survive anything. That what we have isn't some fragile thing that crumbles under pressure. It's real and tested and solid. Mason kissed her temple. Plus, you got a book deal out of it. That's something. Elena laughed. The book deal had come through 2 weeks earlier. A major publisher interested in her story about navigating corporate leadership while maintaining personal relationships. She'd signed the contract the same day Patricia Chen had been made permanent CEO of Crestwell, and it felt like the perfect symmetry. Endings and beginnings all wrapped up together. What do you think comes next? Elena asked. After the honeymoon, after the book is finished, what does our life look like? I don't know, Mason admitted, and for the first time in years that doesn't terrify me. We'll figure it out, together. That's the whole point. They stood there for a while longer, watching the sun set over the botanical garden, holding each other in comfortable silence. Inside, Ellie stirred and called out for them, and they went to her together. Their daughter, because that's what she was now, officially and legally and in every way that mattered. The honeymoon was a week in a cabin in the mountains, deliberately chosen for its lack of cell service and distance from anything resembling corporate culture. They hiked trails that Elena discovered she actually did enjoy, not because successful people were supposed to, but because they were beautiful. They taught Ellie to fish in a nearby stream with mixed results and much laughter. They spent evenings reading books and playing board games and being boring in the best possible way. On the last night, as they sat on the cabin's porch watching stars emerge in the impossibly dark sky, Mason said, "I have a confession." "Should I be worried?" Elena asked. "When you made that joke in the conference room, the birthday proposal, I knew immediately I was going to say yes. Not the joke yes, but actual yes. It was too fast, too ridiculous. But I looked at you standing there all confident and funny and vulnerable underneath, and I thought, this woman is going to completely disrupt my life, and I want her to. You're telling me you planned this entire chaos from the beginning? I'm saying I chose it, just like you did. We both looked at each other and decided that whatever complications came with loving each other, they'd be worth navigating." Mason turned to face her. "We were right. It was worth it." "Past tense, we're not done yet." "No," Mason agreed. "We're just getting started." When they returned from the honeymoon, Elena threw herself into writing. The book became her obsession in the best way, channeling everything she'd learned about corporate politics, relationship management, and the impossible standards women in leadership faced. She wrote about the birthday joke, the investigation, the lawsuits, all of it. But she also wrote about resilience and partnership and refusing to apologize for being human. Mason returned to work, not at Crestwell, but at a smaller tech consulting firm that valued his skills without the complicated history. He worked reasonable hours, came home for dinner every night, and never once regretted leaving the company where he'd spent 4 years. Some chapters needed to close completely before new ones could begin. Ellie started 3rd grade with the confident swagger of a kid whose family had survived hell and come out stronger. She told anyone who'd listen about her stepmom, the author, and her dad, the consultant, and their dog, because yes, Elena and Mason had eventually caved on the dog question and adopted a rescue terrier named Newton, who was currently terrorizing their backyard. 6 months after the wedding, Elena's book hit shelves with the provocative title, Love and Liability: What Corporate America Gets Wrong About Executive Relationships. It got reviewed in major business publications, sparked debates on leadership podcasts, and sold remarkably well for what was essentially a memoir about surviving corporate politics. But the part Elena was most proud of came 3 months after publication when she received an email from a woman in Chicago. "I'm a VP at a Fortune 500 company," the woman wrote. "I've been hiding my relationship with a colleague for 2 years because I was afraid of what it would do to my career. Your book gave me the courage to disclose it properly and fight for appropriate boundaries rather than living in secrecy. Thank you for showing me it was possible." Elena printed that email and kept it on her desk. Then came another, and another. Women from various industries writing to say they'd been inspired, supported, given frameworks for having these difficult conversations in their own companies. The book was creating ripples Elena hadn't anticipated, changing conversations in boardrooms she'd never set foot in. You're making a difference, Mason said one evening, reading over her shoulder as she responded to emails. All that suffering had purpose. I wouldn't say that, Elena corrected. The suffering was real and awful, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but at least it resulted in something useful. At least other people can learn from our mistakes and our strategies. Ever the pragmatist. Someone has to be, now that I've married an optimist. Life settled into rhythms that were sometimes boring and always precious. Elena wrote in the mornings while Ellie was at school and Mason was at work. Afternoons were for research or interviews with other executives who'd faced similar challenges. Evenings belonged to family, dinner together, homework help, the mundane miracle of just being present. They had their first real fight as a married couple 3 months in, something stupid about whose turn it was to do dishes that spiraled into deeper fears about losing themselves in domesticity. They worked through it the way they'd learned to work through everything: honest conversation, willingness to admit fault, and refusing to let pride override love. We're going to screw up sometimes, Mason said, after they'd apologized and made up. We're going to forget who does what chore, or say something careless, or get stressed and take it out on each other. That's normal. The difference is we don't let it break us. When did you get so wise about relationships? When I found someone worth being wise for. The 1-year anniversary of the wedding arrived faster than Elena expected. They'd planned to do something special, a fancy dinner, maybe a weekend away. Instead, Ellie came down with the flu, and they spent the anniversary taking turns holding her hair while she threw up and watching children's movies at 3 a.m. This is very romantic, Elena said as they collapsed into bed at dawn, both exhausted from overnight nursing duty. This is life, Mason corrected. The real stuff. Not the big dramatic moments, just showing up for each other when things are messy and unglamorous. I wouldn't change it, Elena said, and meant it. Her second book was already in the works, this one about building authentic leadership culture that supported whole humans rather than corporate automatons. Publishers were interested, speaking requests were coming in, and Elena was developing a reputation as someone who'd survive the impossible and come out fighting. But her favorite role wasn't author or speaker or former CEO. It was stepmom. Watching Ellie's science fair presentation about ecosystem balance and feeling pride so fierce it hurt. Helping with math homework while Mason cooked dinner, all of them working together in comfortable chaos. Being the person Ellie called when she had a bad day at school and needed someone to vent to. You know what I realized? Elena said to Mason one evening. They were in bed. The house finally quiet after getting Ellie to sleep. I spent years thinking my purpose was building companies and proving I belonged in leadership. But my actual purpose was getting to this point. To you and Ellie, and this life we've built. Everything else was just the path that got me here. That's very profound for 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. I'm serious. All those impossible choices, all that fighting, it made sense because it led here, to us. Mason pulled her closer. You know what I realized? That birthday joke you made wasn't a joke at all. Some part of you knew, even then, that we'd end up here. You were asking a real question, and I was giving a real answer. We just didn't know it yet. What if I say yes? Elena murmured, remembering. What if I say yes? Mason echoed. Turns out yes was exactly the right answer. 2 years after the wedding, Crestwell Dynamics invited Elena to speak at their annual leadership conference. She almost declined. Too much history, too many complicated feelings. But Patricia Chen personally called and said, "The junior staff specifically requested you. They want to hear your story directly. You owe it to them." So Elena went, stood on a stage in front of 200 Crestwell employees and told them everything. The birthday joke, the investigation, the lawsuits, the board meetings where her character was questioned and her relationship weaponized, the moments of wanting to give up. And ultimately, the choice to keep fighting because the alternative meant letting small-minded people define what was possible. I'm not going to stand here and tell you it was easy or worth it in some cosmic sense, Elena said, wrapping up her talk. It was brutal and unfair, and there were days I regretted every choice that led to that pain. But I learned something important. You can survive impossible situations if you're fighting for something that matters. And love matters. Partnership matters. Being fully human in professional spaces matters. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. The applause was thunderous. Afterwards, she was mobbed by employees wanting to share their own stories, ask advice, thank her for her courage. Patricia Chen found her an hour later, still signing books and answering questions. "You changed this place," Patricia said quietly. Patricia, Chow Cha-san. "More than you know. We have policies now that protect people in relationships, clear protocols, support systems, because you refused to accept that having personal feelings meant you couldn't be a good leader." "How's the company doing?" Elena asked. "Really?" "Thriving. Record profits last quarter, 3 new major clients, and a culture where people feel safe being human." Patricia smiled. "Turns out when you treat employees like whole people rather than corporate robots, they perform better." "Who knew?" "Imagine that." That evening, Elena came home to find Mason and Ellie in the kitchen attempting to bake a cake. The kitchen was a disaster. Flour everywhere, eggshells in the batter, Newton the dog licking something sticky off the floor. "What's the occasion?" Elena asked. "Ellie got an A on her ecosystem project," Mason said. "We're celebrating." "And also Daddy said we could have cake for no reason if we wanted," Ellie added honestly. "So we wanted cake." Elena looked at her family, her chaotic, imperfect, absolutely perfect family, and felt something in her chest expand. This was what winning looked like. Not corner offices or titles or vindication in court, though those had their place. This. Coming home to people who loved her unconditionally. Being part of something bigger than herself. Having permission to be messy and human and still worthy of love. "Can I help?" Elena asked. "You can try to salvage whatever it is we've created," Mason offered. "Fair warning, we've stopped following the recipe." Elena rolled up her sleeves and dove in. They made a terrible cake that tasted surprisingly good. They ate it while watching Ellie's favorite dinosaur documentary for the 10th time. Newton begged for scraps. Mason fell asleep on the couch halfway through. Ellie curled up against Elena and asked questions about Mesozoic climate patterns that Elena had no hope of answering accurately. It was ordinary, it was boring, it was perfect. Later, after they'd gotten Ellie to bed and Mason had woken up enough to stumble to their room, Elena stood in the kitchen cleaning up the baking disaster and thought about that conference room 2 years ago. Elena Ward, CEO, making a joke proposal to her quiet project manager. "Will you marry me?" she'd asked, expecting laughter. "What if I say yes?" he'd responded, changing everything. The path from that moment to this one had been brutal. They'd lost jobs, fought lawsuits, endured scrutiny that should have destroyed them. They'd been tested in ways that broke most relationships. But they'd survived. More than survived. They'd built something real and lasting out of the wreckage. Elena's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Hi, Ms. Ward. I attended your talk at Crestwell today. I'm a junior project manager dating someone in senior leadership. We've been hiding it for 8 months out of fear. Your story gave me courage to disclose properly and fight for what matters. Thank you for showing us the way." Elena smiled and typed back, "You're welcome, and good luck. It's worth fighting for." She looked around her messy kitchen, cake crumbs on the counter, Newton sleeping in a pile of spilled flour, dishes stacked in the sink waiting to be washed. Through the doorway, she could see Mason in their bedroom, already asleep despite his promises to help clean up. Down the hall, Ellie was probably still awake, reading under the covers with a flashlight. This was her legacy, not the companies she'd built, or the lawsuits she'd won, or even the books she'd written. This family, this love, this ordinary, extraordinary life they'd fought so hard to protect. Elena turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, climbing in carefully beside Mason. He stirred, pulled her close without fully waking, and murmured something that sounded like, "Love you." "Love you too," Elena whispered back. "Thank you for saying yes." And in the quiet dark of their bedroom, in the house they'd made a home, Elena Ward, former CEO, current author, stepmom, wife, and survivor of impossible choices, finally let herself rest. The fighting was over. The war was won. Not because they'd destroyed their enemies or proven everyone wrong, but because they'd chosen each other over and over again until choosing each other became the easiest, most natural thing in the world. Outside, the world kept spinning. Companies kept demanding impossible choices from their leaders. Women kept facing double standards. Relationships kept being weaponized as evidence of weakness or distraction. But somewhere in a modest house with a messy kitchen and a rescue terrier and a brilliant 8-year-old sleeping down the hall, two people had proven that love could survive scrutiny, that partnership could withstand pressure, that you didn't have to choose between professional success and personal fulfillment. You could fight for both and win. The story that had started with a birthday joke ended with this: a family sleeping peacefully, secure in the knowledge that whatever came next, they'd face it together. And that was more than enough. It was everything.